when he dropped a single chicken nugget into a starving miniature world, and by sunset, 87 people were calling him their god. The nugget was cold, cheap, and leftover. From Matinolds, to them, it landed beside their village like a golden mountain. He found them under the cloudy glass of an antique table 5 seconds before a black-clad collector set fire to their last seed cart and cornered a girl no taller than his thumb. Beneath the glass, thumb-sized Mara fought two collectors while her mother and brother were trapped beside the cart. The torch touched the seed. He moved. One cold drop from his paper cup fell through the glass and hit like a water bomb. It smothered the fire, knocked 3 men off their feet, and made the blade miss. He flipped a clear measuring cup over their leader and 3 soldiers before they could recover. The leader lunged through the gap. He dragged the cup. Its rim caught him across the chest with a hard crack, knocked him completely senseless. Only then did the young woman pull the older one free, and he saw a crossbow bolt lodged low in her side. He slid one finger through the strange resistance under the glass, tore a sterile gauze into fibers, and tried to hold pressure. A warm red stain touched his skin. Pain opened across his palm. A purple bruise rose beneath the exact place where the stain touched him. The membrane refused to let him lift her into his world. The badly hurt woman forced a broken silver pendant into her daughter's fist and said words he learned later: "Do not let the black half find the silver." Then her hand went still on his fingertip. The people around her were still starving. He cut a leftover chicken nugget into 3 pieces, cooled one, and lowered it onto a clean plate shard. It landed beside the square, taller than a cottage. The dark-haired woman made the adults stand back and fed the children first. One boy took a bite, started crying, and hid half in his shirt for later. That was the first miracle. But get this, everything after had a price. His brain did not catch up until the children were eating. 5 minutes earlier, he had been alone with a half-paired fryer compressor, an estate sale table, and the kind of dinner people buy when they are too tired to respect themselves. The table was 4 feet long, brass-rimmed, and carved underneath like a decorative valley. He had assumed it was an expensive model, built for someone with more floor space than judgment. The apartment was 1 room pretending to be 3. Mattress behind a curtain, utility sink beside the workbench, kitchen counter close enough to reach without standing. The table had arrived that afternoon from an estate cleanout because the owner wanted the brass salvaged, and he hated throwing away mechanisms he did not understand. He had not called anyone when the village appeared, partly because it was impossible, mostly because the first useful thing in front of him was not a phone. It was a cup of water. Then the compressor coughed. The floor vibrated. Smoke inside the table moved against the wind. Nothing under the glass looked staged. Once hungry children reached through ash for scorched seed. The details refused every excuse his brain offered. He leaned closer and saw crooked cottages, a dry millstream, and faces so hollow their clothes seemed 2 sizes too large. Riders in black were forcing people from doorways too weak to slam. The young woman carried a sack of gray seed almost bigger than her chest. The older woman tried to push her toward seeking safety. The boy followed with a cracked wooden bowl, and they caught all 3. He could not understand their words as the glass turned their voices into scratchy and thunderous noise, but he understood a boot on someone's back and the cruel smile on the collector leader's face as his men dragged the older woman to the cart. His short spear had a point so straight it flashed like a sewing needle. He noticed that detail without understanding why it mattered. The other weapons were crude iron and sharpened scrap, but his point was different, smooth, identical. On both sides, too precise for the starving road around them. He noticed the mismatch because his repair work had trained him to distrust one clean part inside a broken machine. He filed it away, not knowing the machine was much larger than the village. The young woman bit one man hard enough to make him howl. He shoved her into the mud, but she came up with her teeth still bared. The older woman looked straight at his reflection. Later, he learned her name was Anwen Rook. He learned the young woman was her daughter Mara, and the skinny boy was Finn. At the time, they were 3 impossible people moments away from losing everything while he stood above them with both hands on a piece of furniture. Once, for 7 seconds, he had stood too still while someone he loved died. That old failure moved his hand before reason could. A water drop saved Anwen from the blade everyone could see, but it did nothing about the bolt already lodged in her side. A great entrance, but terrible timing. Mara knew that too. She looked from his finger to his face before pressing against his skin. Terror went through her first. Then calculation and finally rage. She trusted his hand because there was nowhere else. To put her mother, not because she believed the sky was kind, when Anne wins. Hand fell open, Mara curled over her body with the pendant between both fists. The square stayed silent except for two collectors sobbing under the measuring cup. Around them, 87 people stared at him like he had done something holy. He had performed basic triage badly on the scale of a nightmare before. Enwin's hand fell. He had tried to lift her higher. The membrane tightened around his finger like cold skin and pushed back. His world accepted water, plastic gauze and food, but refused her. He kept pressure on the injury with his fingernail and tried to remember the clean emergency steps people learn. So panic has somewhere to stand. Mara held her mother's face while Celeste, severe woman he had not yet met, watched his clumsy care without mistaking it for holiness. Anwin looked at him one final time. There was no worship in it, only exhausted urgency. He had stopped the danger everyone could see, but arrived too late for the one already inside her. Maybe that was unfair, but it still landed. Talk about brutal. Hunger returned before grief even left. Children searched the ash for any seed the fire had missed. An old man picked through ash until Mara slapped his hand away and nearly fell, so he reached for the food nugget, keeping the other two cooled pieces on his side. The exposed piece below was the one that later turned sour. The nugget did not feed them for 6 straight days, but it bought the first hours that let them steal the next 6. He did not know whether their bodies could tolerate salt, grease, or anything else he took for ordinary. That first serving was pure desperation, not a nutrition plan. He cooled it until the steam faded, setting it on a clean shard instead of the mud, and Elias held his hand still as Mara decided who approached. The lesson took less than a minute. His abundance meant nothing if the people below could not use it without being knocked over, scorched, or trampled. Mara stood beside the golden chunk with her mother's pendant around her neck and soot streaked across her sleeve. She shouted at the crowd so sharply that even through the glass, Elias understood the command: adults back, children first. One man rushed anyway. Mara wrapped him across the shoulder with the handle of her broken knife. Good, finally, someone down there was being reasonable. She pointed 2 older women toward the food. They carved crumbs loose with belt knives and pottery. A piece the size of his thumbnail fed a line of children. He counted them twice after the food line formed: 87 people, including 7 children too weak to stand. That number mattered because miracles make crowds abstract, and he needed them to remain individuals before his size turned decisions into simple arithmetic. Finn watched him the whole time, eating only after Mara forced food into his hand. Finn did not thank him. Elias respected that. The 2 older women worked like quarrymen, cutting the crust into ledges and passing crumbs through pottery bowls. A little girl licked grease from both hands, then stared at them as if she expected the food to vanish. One boy tucked half his portion inside his shirt. Mara saw him and let him keep it. Hoarding looked different when Tomorrow had spent months threatening not to arrive. The kneeling started anyway. One by one, people dropped into the mud. Some pressed their faces flat, some raised both hands. One phrase came through again and again, shaped by desperate mouths: high mercy. Mara did not kneel. She pressed the pendant against her forehead and looked up at him with eyes red from smoke and loss. Can you hear me? He asked. His English rolled under the glass like weather. Most villagers screamed and clutched their ears. Mara flinched, then went still. She heard him, but not in English. Not exactly. The meaning arrived whole in his head, carried by the silver against her skin. Her voice was rough, furious, and alive. Elias almost laughed because his brain had run out of appropriate responses. Okay, he said. That's new, she muttered, narrowing her eyes. Are you the thing that eats the sky? No, the thing that eats people, or a hungry spirit. He was just a repairman. She stared at him. He sighed. That meant no. Behind her, an older man shouted and gestured for her to kneel. Another woman grabbed Mara's elbow, but she shook her off so hard she nearly fell. My mother is dead. My brother is hungry. If the ceiling wants worship, it can wait its turn. The ceiling, that was Elias himself, a man, reached for her. Elias lowered his finger until its shadow covered him, and he reconsidered his theology. I don't want you to worship me, Elias said. Mara looked up suspicious. I'm a man, a very confused man, he said. I can help with food. I can try to keep those men away, but I'm not a god. She looked at the unconscious collector under the cup rim, the wet seed, ash, the nugget mountain, and his face across her sky. That's a stupid thing to say from up there, she retorted. Fair enough. She touched the pendant again. Then here are my terms, sealing, she declared. I translate because my people need to live. You do not order me to kneel. You do not order my brother to kneel. You do not take my mother's silver, if you lie. The tiny girl vowed to make him regret it. She was barely an inch tall, starving and covered in smoke, mud, and grief, threatening a giant who could easily flatten her. House the giant believed her. She studied his face, then turned and translated, not all of it he could tell from their reactions. Some of the villagers looked relieved, while others looked offended. One broad-shouldered man near the forge glared upward as if memorizing the giant's eyes for some future argument. The broad-shouldered man was Owen Pike. He did not kneel either, which pleased the giant. Mara kept the silver pendant without asking. Night finally settled over the village of Ashwick. They buried young Anwen beside the burned seed cart because nobody had the strength left to carry her farther. Mara tore a strip of scorched strap and tied it around her wrist. Finn stood beside her, dry-eyed but visibly shaking. They had no strength for a proper procession. 4 people carried Anwen on a door ripped from a burned cottage, and even that was almost too much. The giant kept his face away from the glass while Mara spoke over the grave. Whatever words she spoke belonged solely to her tiny people, not to the enormous stranger who had arrived far too late. When she tied the scorched strap around her wrist, Finn reached for her hand and missed twice before she caught his. The giant left the cup over the 2 surviving collectors until Owen and 3 others bound them. The men inside had watched a transparent glass wall descend, their leader collapse unconscious, and an absolute mountain of food arrive. Neither converted, though, because terror is not the same as faith. That distinction mattered far more than the giant understood. He should have watched the fence. 1 collector had escaped during the sudden water impact, and he was the one carrying the needle stray point. He crawled through a ditch while everyone else watched the food. Grief or the giant? He spotted him only when he reached the far edge of the glasslit valley and staggered toward a black road marker. The giant reached down. The world blurred. His fingers struck cold glass where open sky had once been. Beyond that boundary line, the runner became a smear of motion, vanishing into terrain the giant could no longer touch. Godhood taught its first hard lesson right there. Power had an incredibly sharp edge. A captured Black Banner route clerk would later repeat the report that the fleeing runner sent from that marker. It was no prayer, but rather 2 lines of code. Keeper found. Second sky opened. By dawn, the massive food nugget sat in the village square like a massive golden cliff, and half the village looked completely ready to starve politely. Beside it, the real problem with suddenly becoming someone else's miracle was that people treated it as if it came with instructions, yet nobody had any useful instructions. Mara eventually found the giant watching her and slowly touched her silver pendant. They will not cut more, she said, explaining that the elders feared he would close the sky. He told her he lowered it simply so they could eat, but they wondered if she had asked correctly. Down in the square, 2 old men guarded the nugget with fish knives, while a woman tied a tiny scrap of linen around one crispy ridge like a shrine ribbon. Finn sat on a broken cartwheel, wrapping his arms around his knees, staring at the golden food as if it had personally offended him. Anwen's grave was only 10 steps away, but nobody looked at it for long. Mara wiped her blade on her sleeve and walked toward the nugget. The crowd murmured. She placed one boot against the crust, sawed off a massive strip the size of a door, and held it up. If the ceiling wants to complain, she told them he could complain to her. The giant replied, saying he says the ceiling approves of vandalism when it prevents starvation. Mara's mouth twitches, showing a glimpse of her deep grief. She hands the first strip to Celeste, the severe woman who watched him fail to save one without ever calling it holy. Celeste smells it, breaks it smaller, and orders the children into a line. Owen Pike, the broad-shouldered blacksmith, stands near the front with a hammer in his belt, glaring directly at his reflection. He does not kneel either. The next major problem is water. Ashwick's well is just a cracked ring of stones filled with mud. By mid-morning, the line at the old well turns into a clash of elbows and cups. He has clean water upstairs, technically a whole city's plumbing. What he lacks is a safe way to give it to tiny people without drowning their houses. He searches his kitchen and finds a shallow, stainless steel ramekin from a restaurant job, wide, low, scrubbed twice. He fills it halfway, carries it to the table with both hands, lowering it toward the dry millard. Everyone back, Mara shouts before he can even warn her. The ramekin settles the mud with a heavy silver thump. To him, a simple sauce cup. To Ashwick, A massive lake dropped from heaven with walls taller than a grown man. Owen approaches first. He tests the side with his hammer, grunts, and starts stacking broken stones against it for steps. Celeste slaps a boy's hand away. Before he can climb inside, she snaps to use cups, not go swimming. 1. Impatient man ignores her, scrambles up the stone steps, leans too far, and vanishes head first into the ramekin. The sudden scream echoing through the yard has a terrifying pitch. The sound of realizing miracles can easily drown you. Owen lunges, hooks him by the belt, and drags him out. The gasping man coughs up water and his pride into the mud, while Celeste curses at him with the controlled fury of someone who has buried far too many idiots. Mara looks up. No more lakes without stairs first, she says. He agrees. Owen glares at the sky, clearly hating that this help is working. He goes back to improving the stairs. By late morning, Mara wants to find 3 missing foragers. He wants her to stay where he can easily see her, but does not dare phrase it that way. He knows better than telling Mara Rook he needs her parked in the center of his view. What happens past the road marker, he asks. She touches her pendant, telling the ceiling to watch, so she walks east with Finn trailing 10 paces behind, pretending badly that he is not worried. The world under his glass moves, while the table beneath stays perfectly still. The image shifts. Ashwick slides toward the left edge. Cottages blur. The burned seed cart shrinks. The road ahead sharpens around Mara, his throat tightens. You carry the window, he says. Mara stops, telling him not to say that like he is putting a collar on her. He did not mean it like that. But she remarks that men rarely do until they hear themselves speak. He needs warning before she leaves his sight, and she needs her privacy. Both can be true. She studies the sky for a moment, nodding once. As she turns, the pendant chain scrapes against a sharp stone on her collarbone. A tiny flash breaks from the silver edge. She catches it quickly, closing her fist. He asks what that was, and she calls it her mother's headache, but he knows she Mara was lying, but since she buried her mother, the Watcher let it stand. Smoke drifted past the orchard. 36 desperate people emerged from the bare trees. They brandished sharpened scraps and heavy, rusted farm tools. Exhausted, wary faces, these desperate people were completely out of friendly options. They looked worse than Ashwick. 2 kids wore potato sacks. One trembling woman gripped her pitchfork with both hands, shaking so hard the tines rattled. Leading them was a thin woman with gray braids and a scarred chin. Later, she would be identified as de la Morne, but right now, she was just dangerous. She aimed her weapon directly at the floating pendant, ignoring Mara entirely. De la spoke fast. Mara answered with visible hands as Finn reached. Mara barked his name. The refugees began to circle around them. The crowd spread. Suddenly, Owen and 6 men charged from Ashwick's side. They carried heavy wooden clubs, the absolute worst thing for a hungry standoff. Sensing an imminent, incredibly stupid bloodbath, the Watcher intervened to calm them. He grabbed a single golden nugget strip from his dinner plate. Placing it behind Mara was the plan, but his hand moved too fast. The heavy scent exploded, hot grease, salt, and absolute abundance. Starving refugees surged like a wild beast as Dela and Owen screamed. 2 children were instantly trampled underfoot. Mara screamed to lift the food. He hoisted it back up into the sky, leaving sobbing crowds reaching. They cursed the empty air. A little girl sat crying in the mud. She was completely terrified, a victim of salvation offered like bread to pigeons. Mara stood firmly between both factions, her broken blade lowered. Pendant raised, she halted the madness. The orchard fell silent, quiet enough to hear the Watcher's refrigerator humming. Celeste arrived, panting heavily. She glanced at the injured girl. She pointed at Dela, then at Owen, and finally at Mara, 3 distinct leaders. There was no vote, just starving factions staring at each other. Mara walked over and untied Anwin's scorched basket strap from her wrist. She laid it on a stone, declaring her mother died beside the first food. Never again would she watch children get trampled for a meal. Owen's jaw flexed. He demanded that Ashwick must eat first. Dela barked an ugly, dry laugh, refusing to watch their baby starve while waiting. As Owen stepped forward, Mara tapped the flat of her broken blade against his chest. It was a warning. Children eat first, she calmly stated. First the kids, then the sick. It would split the guard duties evenly. Anyone who grabbed would get absolutely nothing. Dela stared up, nodding slowly. A hard rule from the Watcher. Meanwhile, Celeste tended the girl. She warned that if anyone started a fight, they would be treated last. The brawlers would wait, a cold rule but highly effective. Delilah lowered her knife first. Owen followed slowly, glaring in pure hatred. The watcher lowered the golden food again, much slower this time around. He set it down gently on the ground, treating the bare dirt like fragile glass. Mara began cutting it into crumbs under the leader's watchful eyes. Groups came forward in pairs. This truce had no beauty to it, no singing, no joy. No embraces. Tense adults looked ready to kill if the food counts felt off. Yet food and water moved. Nobody was crushed, Mercer almost argued. About proper portion storage and dirty hands touching the freshly cut food. But then he saw Mara standing between two desperate, soot-stained, starving factions. His advice would only sound like thunderous judgment, a god. Showing up late is just another disaster, so Mercer kept quiet and watched her manage the crowd, standing still as furniture. That was the main difference between a miracle and a functional system. Miracles dropped from the sky. Systems were Mara staring down armed thugs while Celeste weaponized medical help. Mercer tried his best not to interfere. By afternoon, he had a repair job across town. A walk-in freezer at a pizzeria was failing fast. If he chose to ignore this job, he wouldn't get paid. Divine powers apparently failed to cover monthly rent. He planned to be gone 20 minutes and despised every step. Repairing the freezer took 2 hours. Duct tape on a fan belt. Suddenly his phone buzzed. Nena Alvarez. Mercer stared at her caller identity until the display died. Nena knew exactly what he sounded like when lying. Former paramedic partners know those signs. He finally returned her call from the alley behind the pizzeria. Are you alive? Mercer, she asked. He replied that mostly isn't a medical state, but it fits. Nena noted he missed his Friday check at Mercy Grill. Unbelievable behavior for him. Mercer stared toward his distant apartment window, feeling ridiculous. Just got busy with some standard emergency repair work, he claimed. She instantly called him a liar. She warned him to eat, sleep, and avoid fixing wounds with electrical tape. He disconnected before she could detect anything else. On his way back, he purchased the cheapest, most basic supplies he could carry: bottled water, crackers, quick rice, medical alcohol, and gloves. No grand holy shopping spree, just a worn-out guy with bills due and a basket of cheap food. Calculating how many desperate lives could fit inside $27. Back at camp, Finn stood waiting near the strange pendant, touching it cautiously with 2 fingers. He demanded to know why Mercer was late. Mara stood behind him, turning completely stiff. Mercer understood his pain for Anwen, the girl who was gone. Beyond his reach, he was just another savior arriving long after the grave was dug. He admitted he didn't know. Finn sneered, asking if that made it better. Mara placed a comforting hand on his shoulder, but the boy snapped back, demanding answers. Mercer could have offered excuses, but simply stated he was late, despite trying. Anwen still died. The small pendant carried their silent grief. Mara looked directly at Mercer, her eyes carrying a heavy weight he did not know how to hold. It wasn't forgiveness or trust, but a raw, grim recognition, she quietly told Finn not to worship Mercer, but also not to deny what he had done. Finn pulled away, heading back toward the food lines. Cold evening air settled in with more people gathering near the orchard. Delaz's 36 followers were now safely inside, turning the tense village of Ashwick into a lit match over dry straw. Every eye watched, every single crumb had witnesses. Suddenly, a dark feathered rider appeared, traveling alone down the eastern road on a dangerously thin horse. The rider on the horse drew instant fury, his black cloak shifting in the wind. He halted just outside the village square, raising both hands before shouting aloud. Mara gripped her pendant, letting the rider's translated words flow through her. By order of Marshal Corin Voss, Warden of the Bracken March, surrender Mara. Rook and the Silver witness within 3 days. If she remains hidden, 7. Neighboring settlements will burn as punishment if the sky interferes. Their children will be taken first. The town square instantly erupted in panic. Delaz's refugees backed away from Mara. Owen gripped his hammer while Celeste quickly counted the children. Finn looked at his sister, then stared at the traveler. And he saw the exact moment they realized his arrival had not ended danger. It had only given their threat a name. Mara stood there completely frozen. He leaned close to her. No one is taking you, he promised solemnly. She slowly looked up, whispering that promises can easily become cages too. Before he could answer, Finn doubled over, retching violently in the mud. 2 smaller children followed. Celeste dropped beside them as Mara spun around. Her pendant chain flashed. the leftover meat nugget sat at the square's edge. Its exposed flesh looking darker than before, the scent turning sour beneath salt. You can feel the pure dread as he stares at the rot, then Celeste glares up. She barked a single command at Mara, who translated it flatly. Quarantine. Finn's breathing turned ragged right after Celeste gave the order. His heavy chest gasped desperately, like a broken engine struggling to turn over without fuel. He lay shivering on a dirt floor mat, huddled near two sick infants. His lips were dry, skin gray under candlelight, as Mara knelt over him. Her shadow fell across his pale face, while desperate villagers begged for help. They pleaded for her to heal him, to command the sickness to leave. The words came through Mara in fragments, her hands gripping both his wrist. And her pendant, her flat voice codified his fear more than shouting would have. Celeste shoved 3 weeping, praying women right out of the narrow doorway. If your gods have clean hands, stay, otherwise get out, she snapped. Mara translated only what mattered, warning them to stop ruining the air. He held his phone flashlight in one hand and clean shirt fabric in the other. His right palm throbbed with Owen's ugly, purple bruise, a lingering debt. Even fantasy worlds kept receipts. Show me his breathing, he urged Mara. She leaned close to count, mimicking the frantic, shallow gasps of the boy. Finn winced away from the light, dry heaving. That confirmed his worst fears. He had fed starving kids heavy, salted meat after days of eating mud. Talk about a costly mistake. He left the exposed meat sitting in the sour air. It is not a curse, he muttered, just severe dehydration and spoiled food. Too much heavy grease, far too much salt. Mara's dark eyes lifted slowly. Your miracle rotted, she whispered. Yes, he admitted, the word tasting like ash. The crowd caught her translation and instantly turned their collective anger toward him. A mother cried, asking if he was punishing them. Delad demanded answers. Owen asked nothing, silently watching the traveler's hands like he wanted to break them. Celeste's sharp voice cut through the rising panic. No more salted meat, she ordered. Boil what local water they can, and collect clean rain from the collectors. Rules were set, hands washed before eating, children watched in pairs, anyone hiding. Symptoms would answer directly to her, not to heaven. Celeste did not wait for his. Shame to settle, she pointed directly at the remaining food and barked. An order, Mara translated, telling everyone to get away now. One man shouted. That the High Mercy's gift could not be thrown out, Celeste turned on him instantly. With dirty sleeves, telling him to eat it himself beside the graves. Leave the children out of his theology, Mara translated without softening it. Mara translated, he mixed a weak rehydration drink in a bottle cap. He used bottled water and a sugar-salt packet from his glove box. This was no divine magic, it was a simple, ugly practical fix. Real treatment was far away, and the kid in front of him was fading. The dose was critical, one tiny drop from his world could drown a child. He touched a clean straw tip to the liquid, letting a tiny bead cling to plastic. Before lowering it down, Mara held Finn's head while Celeste touched the bead to his. Lips using clay, Celeste ordered everyone to wait, so they waited. Finn finally swallowed. His lungs remembered how to breathe. They did it again, then again. Celeste carefully controlled every sip. When a mother reached for more, Owen Pike blocked her arm without looking to him for any permission. That was good. Finally, someone down there was learning a useful bad habit. Outside, Owen and 2 women dragged the spoiled food to the ash pit. People cried in absolute despair. As if burning a saint, Celeste watched it burn, saying if heaven spoils they must burn heaven. In times like this, there is zero room for jokes. Finn's breathing steadied near dawn. The smaller children stopped getting sick. Nobody was fine, but that was a luxury for times before famine. At least the crisis retreated slightly. He placed both hands on the table, urging Mara to tell them he did this. He admitted he fed them wrong and left the food out carelessly. Mara translated it fully. The shelter's mood changed instantly. Around those words, some felt betrayed, while others were glad blame finally had a face. Owen's stare sharpened, but he stopped muttering that Celeste was faithless. Celeste only nodded, as if confession was less impressive than clean water, but still better than lies. Then loud horns sounded from the Eastern Road. By morning, Captain Brandsable reached Ashwick's Edge with 12 Black Banner soldiers and 8 bound captives from the outer farms. He did not charge in screaming, that would have been easier to hate. He walked in, straight-backed, neat and calm, his boots perfectly polished, while everyone else had mud up to their knees. Clean men always made him nervous. A dirty brute shows his worst, but a clean one makes everyone wait for the knife. The captives were tied in a loose circle around him, 6 adults, 1 elderly man and a young girl near Finn's age. Sable planted his spear in the dirt. With a polished point that caught the light, it was not rough village work. It looked like a giant sewing needle turned deadly, designed for a tyrant. To wield with cold precision, Mara touched her pendant as Sable's voice translated through. Clear and sharp, he demanded they surrender Mara Rook and the silver. Witness warning that the false sky could only watch. Owen raised his heavy hammer. Mara caught his wrist, pleading no. Sable smiled up at the empty sky. Just empty air. Sable couldn't see Eli's face, which was the first real advantage. Sable drew his knife and sliced open an empty grain sack right at the elder's feet. Gray dust spilled out as Mara yelled that his lord must have taught him that word. Sable looked toward her voice, replying that his lord teaches them very useful words. Sable smiled as several terrified villagers crossed themselves at the sound of it. It was cheap, symbolic cruelty, unless you were hungry enough to understand. Then Sable tapped his sharp blade against the rope circle for everyone to see. As the villagers watched, Eli's fingers curled tightly over the brass rim of his cup. He could have dropped a cup right over Sable, or over the road itself. But doing that risked flattening the wrong area because of Sable's clever positioning. Sable had placed 8 captives exactly where Eli's heavy hand wanted to strike. Mara sensed his anger, whispering for him not to act, though he already knew. A mysterious man in a patched brown coat slipped out from behind the refugees. But watch closely, this shady older stranger is about to make his move. He carried a gambler's grin and a badly trimmed beard, looking completely out of place. His eyes scanned for exits first, then he bowed politely to Mara. This man, Rafe, jokingly asked if they were done admiring the captain's posture. He claimed to know a safe drainage cut behind the old dye house. Mara pressed her knife against his coat seam incredibly fast. Eli almost missed it. She demanded to know why, and he blamed his disappointing career choices. When she demanded the truth, Rafe explained his past as Owen stepped forward. Owen stepped forward aggressively, and Rafe quickly stressed that he was former. He pointed with 2 fingers, careful not to pull away from Mara's blade. He explained the rope circle had 3 lookout guards perched along the roof. There was also 1 blind spot, right behind a collapsed tannery wall. Rafe knew their patterns, noting that Sable's men only trusted straight roads. Neither Eli nor Mara trusted him, but 8 captives were still tied up. They were surrounded by shining spears, and there was no time for hesitation. Eli grabbed some waxed dental floss and tied it to a bent tack. He lowered the line carefully between the chimney and a broken roof beam. To Eli it was just floss, but to the scouts a white road appeared. 3 brave villagers hooked themselves onto this magical line using bent nails. They slid silently above the dark alley, while Rafe focused on the soldiers. He ignored the miracle entirely, which made Eli wonder why the spears shone. Eli asked through Mara, and Rafe's easy charm vanished for a brief second. He murmured that someone wanted the peasants to think Voss controlled the sacred steel. Without another word, the scouts positioned themselves as Sable raised his hand. Get ready because Eli is setting up his wildest trick, yet using a phone. A total budget setup of $7, but it was time for action. Mara nodded to his signal and shouted loud enough to alert the guards. She called him Eli Mercer, exposing his real name just as he triggered the flash. Blinding white light exploded across the road, turning everyone below into dark silhouettes. Eli ended up blinding himself as well, a perfect consequence of his hasty plan. But Mara moved instantly, cutting the first rope while the scouts dropped down. Ambush them. Slicing the second and third guards, Owen charged low, ignoring Sable to target the soldier nearest the old man, taking a shallow cut to the thigh he kept moving, which told Eli everything useful about Owen Pike and a few things. Knowing 6 captives broke free before Sable could recover, Mara's sleeve brushed Owen's leg as he stumbled back. A tiny red smear from his scrape touched the pendant chain, making the silver grow warm enough that she flinched. She covered her reaction by yelling at him to stop dripping on her boots. Eli noticed but did not understand. Get down, Sable snapped. His soldiers did not aim at the sky. They aimed their lances at the 2 captives still tied, because Sable was not testing Eli's strength, basically checking if power made him stupid, but Eli had one option left that did not involve crushing anyone. Under his workbench sat a shop magnet strong enough to ruin a cheap watch and magnetize his screwdrivers. He slid it under the active part of the table with both hands. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the Saint steel flew, needle-tipped lances ripped sideways, belt knives jumped from sheaths, a helmet buckle tore loose and smacked a soldier in the mouth. The flying metal slammed onto the road. With a sound like angry bells, the soldiers panicked. Captives dove. Mara used the opening to drive her shoulder into Sable's knees. He fell hard, rolled and came up with a split lip and cold fury in his eyes. Owen freed the last two captives. Eli pictured Sable under glass, pinned, bottled, and labeled, and stored on a shelf for later hatred. Sable saw the look on Mara's face and understood enough. He grabbed one of his own stumbling soldiers by the collar and shoved him toward the magnet pile. The man crashed into the heap of steel. Sable cut off his black cloak, threw it over the shining pile, and crawled backward through mud and screaming people. Me shouted to stop him. Eli reached out. Sable dragged himself past the same kind of invisible edge that had swallowed the first collector. Eli's fingertips met cold resistance. The magnetic pole on the steel vanished at the boundary, and yes, Sable noticed immediately. Stood beyond reach, breathing hard, one hand pressed to his split lip. Then he bowed, not to worship but to measure. Eli hated him immediately. Celeste collected one of the lance tips in a cloth, refusing to let anyone touch it bare. If it is holy, she joked, it can survive being stored like evidence. Her joke was absolutely terrible, but Eli needed it. The captives were alive. Owen scraped thigh was wrapped. Finn slept weakly in the shelter. For 1 hour, Ashwit believed they had won something clean. Even Eli almost believed it. Evening ruined that. A courier came from the north on foot, staggering between the houses with a black cord tied around his wrist. His right hand was wrapped so tightly that only the tips of 2 fingers showed. Celeste ran before Mara finished translating his first word. He refused water until he delivered the message. Marshal Voss has corrected Elder Wren of Low Barrow for sheltering silver rumors. He rasped. The elder was executed on the chain. The sky may count. That is the first lesson. Nobody spoke. The courier lifted his wrapped hand toward Eli's reflection, raspy but clear. Tell Eli Mercer, he said, I know where heaven ends. Eli's apartment went quiet. Below, Mara's eyes found Rafe, who had smiled through knives, hunger, and a line across rooftops, had gone completely still. He stared at the black cord like it had tightened around his own throat as Rafe whispered something he could not catch. Mara heard it, and her face changed just a fraction. Later, she told him it was not a prayer but a root code, the kind black banner scouts used when a message mattered more than the messenger. Mara saw it. He saw her see it, but here is the terrifying part. He realized too late that Voss had not lost the morning, not really. He had learned the shape of his hand. He had learned his name, and now he knew where he stopped. By dawn, Mara had decided the safest thing in Ashwick was also the stupidest thing to move, the pendant. The silver witness, the piece of heaven that every hungry person wanted near them, and every black banner writer wanted around her throat. She stood at the eastern fence with Rafe Calder, 4 scouts, a wrapped strip of clean ration crumbs, and Owen arguing from a stool because Celeste had forbidden him from walking. On his cut thigh, Owen insisted she was not taking their only window, but Mara adjusted Anwen's burned strap around her wrist, replying that she would take the only thing Voss was hunting and leave the window behind as a clever plan. Owen looked ready to stand anyway. Celeste pressed 2 fingers to his bandage, warning him against it. And she would reopen the wound herself. He sat. He hated this plan. Voss knew where his reach ended. Sable knew he used light, magnets, and restraint. Someone out there had polished steel that did not belong in a starving medieval road army, yet Mara wanted to walk the silver right toward the black road because somewhere along that road were grain wagons, captives, and the next trick designed for his hand. He pleaded to at least send more people, but Mara touched the pendant, whispering that more people made more noise. He ordered her to stay close. She smiled, calling his order a mere request born of insomnia, and gave this guy a faint smile. Then she walked, and Ashwick slid out from under him. The cottages blurred first. The Ramkin Lake became a silver comma, the burned cart, Anwen's grave, Finn's shelter, Owen's glower, everything he wanted to keep in one piece drifted toward the rim until the village was gone behind Mara's shoulder. The road ahead sharpened, for the first time since he found them. Ashwick could have burned, and he would not have seen the match. Rafe noticed him go quiet. Of course he did. Men like him heard fear the way dogs heard meat hit floor. He joked that if things went badly, he would be spared the visual Details: Mara put the flat of her knife lightly against his sleeve. Usefulness. First, comfort later. He drawled that he adored clear leadership, leading them off the road before the first marker stone. The stone was painted black on one side and scraped clean on the other, the kind of marker locals pretended not to notice. Mara said Anwin used an old goat path above it when the first harvest failed. Rafe knew the turn before she named it. Mara's pendant warmed once as she passed. The roadstone not fire hot, but more like a coin left in sunlight. Her hand closed over it and looked up. He asked if she felt that. She replied she felt many things, and most were none of his business, which clearly meant yes. The Black Road checkpoint looked like a refugee camp to anyone who had never seen one. He, however, had apparently become qualified. Real refugees huddled wrong, curling around children and keeping bags close, watching food. This camp had wagons parked square, boots facing the same direction, cooking smoke too thin, and one man pretending to limp with the wrong leg. Wraith crouched on a scrub bridge, pointing out 3 archers behind the split oak and 2 under the broken wagon. That woman cooking has soldier boots under her skirt. Mara's eyes never left the camp. She knew this from running routes, while he knew because those serving Sable believe straight lines are essential. That was no real answer, just a decorative refusal. She stared at him as Rafe's smile softened, making things even worse. He admitted he wore the black uniform, scouted roads, and carried messages, telling himself that starving in uniform was nobler than starving without one. Owen was not there to punch him, so Mara handled the tension herself, asking how much he carried for Voss. He said if he told her before they found grain, she would be tempted to throw him straight into a ditch. That sounded like another decorative refusal, but he claimed it was his best. Mara held his gaze a moment longer, warning him that she would cut the next lie out. Rafif bowed without smiling, accepting the terms when a whistle came from below. A group in black cloaks rushed 3 children into the road hollow with ropes bound around their wrists. Behind them, 2 figures forced a woman to her knees from above. Through the thick smoke, they looked like Sable soldiers. Setting up another rope circle, the giant's hand reached for the parts tray first. Without thinking, the steel washer was wide as a dinner plate, heavy enough to bend a cart axle. The giant raised it, intending to drop it between the soldiers and the children. Mara's scream commanded him to stop, and he froze. The washer hovered there, shaking in the giant's fingers, its shadow swallowing the children and their captors. Mara sprinted down the muddy ridge, sliding in the mud, catching a child by the shoulder while tearing at the black cloak on the nearest soldier, revealing a woman covered in severe starvation, bruises on her face and a deep rope mark. This soldier was just a mother forced into a cruel costume. The rest were the same, starving civilians trembling so hard they could barely hold the ropes. The kneeling woman was not being executed, but simply whispered to make it look real. Suddenly, hidden archers rose from the nearby ditch with bows drawn. The giant held the washer until his wrist burned. A road officer behind the wagon hissed to hold fire until they crossed the blind line. The words sounded completely wrong, far too rehearsed. Mara looked up at the giant, who understood her silent message instantly. Not yet, so he did nothing. Watching people aim arrows at her was a terrible, painful form of restraint for him. Luckily, Rafe moved first. He noted the wagons, realizing this staged hunger play guarded something ugly. He quickly led Mara under the broken wagon as the decoys scattered. Arrows snapped into the wet dirt around them. A scout took a shaft through his sleeve but kept crawling. The officer ordered everyone to fire on anyone not dressed in black, including his own decoys. Voss never hesitated to use innocent lives as shields and disposable camouflage. Mara slid beneath the nearest ration wagon, finding a strange plank that did not match the floor. Wraith knelt beside the massive wheel, speaking loud enough for the guards to hear. He praised the beautiful theft as incredibly clean, with empty wagons hiding full bellies underneath, asking if Voss knew they kept the extra food. The officer turns, giving her a window. Mara jams her knife into the wood and twists. One board cracks, then another, letting the grain pour through the gap in a golden rush, spilling into the mud like an hourglass breaking. The camp instantly shifts. Starving people notice food much faster than they notice flying arrows. Desperate refugees crawl forward. The guards can only stare at the hidden bags beneath the broken floorboards. A young archer lowers his weapon as his own daughter reaches out for scattered grain. The panicked officer screams at his men to fire on the thieves, but nobody moves. Enraged, the officer fires an arrow, hitting the young archer high In his shoulder, that ends the hesitation. The archer's daughter screams and drops right. Beside him, the other guards raise their weapons halfway, torn between duty and the painful hunger staring back at them. Magic tricks cannot solve this, so the watcher prepares to drop solid proof. A single wrapped ration bar lands directly on a clear patch of the dirt road, well away from the officer, but close enough for the starving crowd to catch the scent of sweet oats through the plastic. The watcher pulls back their hand, offering no grand speeches or holy signs. Lessons have been learned, even if they came with a heavy price. Mara slices the wrapper open with one swift stroke. She does not take a bite, nor does she feed Owen's group because Owen's people are not here. Instead, she breaks off a tiny piece and places it inside the wounded archer's daughter's hand. The little girl stares while the nearest guard watches his captain's arrow pin the wounded father's cloak and bloody shoulder too. The wagon turning around, he aims his bow at the officer and others follow. Talk about a sudden shift. The officer tries playing nice, a sure sign he is losing. He commands them to stand down, but the archer's brother shoots the officer clean off, his feet pinning his heavy coat to a wagon wheel. Now the checkpoint becomes pure chaos. Nothing is clean as desperate people claw over the spilled grain. Delaz. Refugee scouts physically beat back two men trying to haul a full sack into the dense forest. Me lifts the guard's young daughter onto a wagon, forcing everyone to look at her as she begins dividing the first open sack. Meanwhile, Rafe steps among the turncoat guards, offering them deals and translating their sheer panic into hope. He promises food for families of those who surrender and safe passage for anyone helping move the heavy wagons. But there is zero mercy for anyone firing on the crowd. The watcher remains silent. Real leadership, it turns out, does not require shouting to make a difference. By early afternoon, Mara secures 3 massive grain wagons, 9 newly allied guards, dozens of extra refugees, and 1 furious road officer bound tightly to his own cart. He is utterly powerless now, yet Rafe did not slip away with a grain cart. The watcher takes note of this, trusting his loyalty about as far as he can. Throw him, which means staying strictly within the boundaries of the silver radius. They begin the journey home beneath a gray sky. At first, they march like proud victors. But soon the quiet road turns eerie. No birds sing near the silent orchard. No smoke rises from Ashwick. Rafe immediately stops smiling. He speeds up. Behind her, the overloaded grain wagons creak loudly, carrying precious food and strangers who have yet to earn their trust. The watcher's vision shifts along with the pendant, trying to press forward like a passenger, leaning into a slow turn. But nothing happens. The voice warns Mara that danger is ahead, telling her to run. The warning is urgent, and she snaps her head up to listen. By afternoon, all restraint is forgotten as black smoke rises over the ridge. Eli grips the table edge so hard that the brass trim bites her palms. She cannot see the village, knowing she belongs out there, but Mira reminds her. There is no softness in Mira's voice, which somehow grounds Eli's frantic mind. Taking a few steps, she gently calls out Eli's name, softening her tone. She has never used Eli's name without shouting it as a battle command. Sprinting toward the smoke, the village of Ashwick slowly comes into view at dusk. The settlement is not completely destroyed, but somehow this partial ruin feels worse. The destruction is selective. 3 cottages stand burned to their blackened ribs. The shelter roof is hacked open, and the local lake water floods the mud. Beside the well, 2 gray shawls cover those who did not survive the raid. Finn sits beside a body, pale and trembling, too weak to stand up. He is too angry to weep. Owen limps toward Mara as the wagon stops. His bandage is freshly bloodied. Clutching his hammer, he points accusingly at Rafe. Owen snaps at Mara for leaving, while Mara only stares at the bodies. She brought back grain, but the raiders struck while the others were away. The bitter truth hurts deeply. A soot-stained woman steps forward to explain what happened. 4 refugee families arrived earlier, claiming that the warlord Sable burned their camp. A trusted woodcutter recognized one of them and let the group pass through. He opened the south lane before Owen could check, welcoming their doom inside. Those refugees were actually scouts, marker men who had no plans to fight. They killed 2 sentries, torched the cottages, spilled the water, and vanished. But first, they smeared black tar on the road before escaping into the woods. The chilling mark is a handprint. 5 dark fingers are spread across the rock. The tar at Ashwick's entrance still shines. Below it, a line is carved. It is written in the secret root code that terrified Rafe the night before. He stares at the tar in horror. Mira notices his panic, while Eli rages. Eli wants immediate pursuit, craving every dark, violent answer to avenge the fallen. She wants someone to pay with their life for those 2 dead villagers. Mira ignores her, looking instead at the wagons, the refugees, and the ruins. She looks at the wounded who trusted Elaine simply to survive another day. Mira coldly declares that they must leave. Owen's face turns completely blank with fury. Owen protests that this is Ashwick, but Mira counters that Ashwick is dead. No one likes the harsh truth. Celeste emerges from the shelter, blood-stained and weary. Owen asks where they could go. Mira suggests the Slate Quarry, 2 miles west. It is rough, defensible land with only one entrance. Mara silently nods in agreement. They must move before the warlord Voss decodes their next destination. No one celebrates the grain now. The food sits there like a cruel joke. It proves they can rob Voss, but also proves his reach is limitless. No translation is needed. Eli looks from the black handprint to the wagons. She sees Finn's pale face and remembers the spot where they lost Anwen. The morning brought stolen food, but the night took their home and their safety. If they wait until dawn, Voss will destroy everything. Eli's defense budget is pathetic. A cheap $9 metal colander is her only weapon. She wishes it were a joke. But it is all Eli has. Below them, Ashwick smells of wet ash and ruin. Graves, me ordered the survivors to pack before the village finished. Grieving, which seemed cruel, until they saw the black handprint drying on the roadstone. Voss did not need to guess anymore. Someone had left a mark. And marks existed for men with torches. The Watcher wanted to chase the marker team. Mara wanted shovels. 2 villagers lay under Celeste's shawls near the tipped ramekin. Finn sat beside them, wrapped in a blanket, weak from sickness and far too angry to shake. Owen limped between the burned cottages, hammer in one hand, his thigh bandage soaked red. Mara insisted they bury them and then move. Owen turned on her, snapping that running only made things easier for Voss. Staying would make it shorter in Ashwick. Mara looked at the hacked roofs, the burned homes in the black tar hand. Her voice dropped flat, saying walls were not memories. Nobody liked that. The Watcher didn't like it from 4 feet above their world, though he had no right to complain. The trusted woodcutter's name was Jory Pell. People whispered his name like a question. Jory had opened the south lane, claiming he knew the families, then vanished before the fire caught. Every time someone repeated Jory's name, Owen's fingers tightened around the hammer. Mara urged him to wait, but Owen spat, snapping that later is for cowards. The Watcher leaned close and agreed she was right, surprising Mara. He hated that, and warned that if Voss reads that mark first, he could win any argument over a grave. That bought them silence, not agreement, but silence was cheaper and still useful. They buried the 2 under the apple stump because there was no time to carry them further, and no strength to pretend ceremony made loss any lighter. Me took blankets from Jory's empty cottage for shrouds, and nobody argued. Finn tried to stand when the first body went down, failed and cursed so softly his pendant barely carried the sound. Celeste comforted him, but he shook her off, then leaned against her anyway. That was Ashwick by then, hatred and need, sharing a single blanket because there were not enough left to separate them. By gray morning, the survivors moved west. News of the grain revolt outran them. Families from marked farms and 2 half-empty hamlets joined the column. Until they passed 300, Exodus was messy, filled with cracked carts, fever patients in grain sacks, children carrying oversized bowls, and armed defectors watched closely by Ashwick men. 3 grain wagons creaked in the center. Celeste refused to leave 2 fever patients behind, but Owen argued they slowed them. Celeste handed him a patient, telling him to be faster, so he carried her. Rafe scouted ahead with his men, pointing the column away from the open road twice. Those dark shapes were not close enough to strike, but close enough to remind them Voss had eyes. They reached a washout halfway to Slate Quarry, where rain cut the road into a muddy mouth. The first cart nearly tipped, sliding grain sacks and children screaming beneath the canvas. The Watcher grabbed a broad metal spatula from his tool bucket, the one normally used for scraping grease off griddles, and lowered it across the gap. Mara ordered him to keep it flat, but flat on the ground was different. She was right, annoyingly. He studied the handle. While Owen and 2 defectors braced the far side with stones, carts rolled across one by one, but halfway through, a wounded driver slipped, and a red mark. Sailing's bare thumb brushed against a scraped chin as he gripped the spatula edge. Pain bloomed across his palm, not sharp this time, but a deep, throbbing ache. A hot bruise pressed into old injuries, making him almost flinch as Finn watched. Finn sat pale under a blanket in the third cart, muttering that Sailing's hand was shaking. Cross before it drops, Mara snapped, showing the classic harsh bedside manner of her family. Everyone crossed the threshold, the lumbering grain wagons keeping their visible survival alive. Every stuck wheel sparked a bitter argument over whose child would eat tomorrow. Me stationed Dela at the rear, Owen near the front, and Rafe nowhere near the coin pouch, a decision Sailing silently approved of as his palm. Grew worse, soon, a giant slate quarry opened below them, like a torn gray bowl. Its ancient stone walls and single road collected pooling rain. It was defensible only if they just wanted something safer than a burned village. Sailing looked at his sink. A metal colander hung there, looking both ridiculous and holy to his tired eyes. A perforated stainless steel dome, its removable rim clicking under his thumb. As he lifted the metal object, a cheap spring clamp snapped against his fingernail. He bought it to stop pasta from escaping, but now he lowered it upside down. Over 300 frightened refugees, while Mara quickly cleared the quarry floor. She aggressively pushed everyone back until the last cartwheel was outside the shadow. Using a kitchen spoon, Sailing pushed 2 loose stones away. The spoon looked like a plow blade down there. He moved slowly, knowing one wrong nudge could turn a family into a lesson. Then the iron nest descended, settling right over the quarry. Shelf with a sound like a buried bell. As the rim struck stone, rain hit. The steel dome and shattered into silver mist. Every hole in the metal became a window or arrow slit where children could stare up at Sailing safely from below. Open sky. For 3 breaths, nobody moved. Then Finn said weakly that it was a cooking helmet for a sleeping giant. A quiet laugh went through the quarry, small and ragged. Sailing needed it more than anyone. Owen wiped rain from his beard. Mercer's fist. No, Mara said. Iron Dome. No, what then? Mara looked at the people huddled under the holes, then at the carts, the wounded, the children. The grain and the iron nest. That name stayed. They tested the holes with fingers. Knives and the kind of hope that gets people stuck. One boy tried to climb through before Owen caught his ankle. A grateful woman kissed the steel rim and looked embarrassed when Mara noticed. The defectors stayed near the entrance until Dela made them carry heavy quarry stones like everyone else, which helped immensely. Nothing makes an enemy less poetic than watching him haul rocks in the rain, of course. Bull was not a fortress just because it landed loudly. The first gust blew cold. Rain through half the holes, soaking Celeste's fever patience. The steel rim left gaps where quarry stone dipped. Smoke from cooking fires curled up and refused to leave fast enough. 2 stressed families immediately started brawling over the driest wall. Before their bed rolls even touched ground, Sailing offered to plug the holes. Mara touched her pendant and looked up slowly, asking what sealing his good intentions could make. She insisted they needed airflow, arrow exits, and visibility to spot danger before it arrived. Owen, still limping, assigned shutters from broken carts. Celeste claimed the driest stone alcove as an infirmary, threatening the others. She forbade storing grain near sickmats, pausing briefly at the hooked mark on Mara's. She muttered about seeing that silver shape in a convent. Ask her when they are not freezing. With that, she went back to the fever mats. Wraith stationed the 9 defectors on the outer watch. Ashwick men stood right behind them. Trust always requires close supervision. Nobody argued that night, not one. Mara walked this inner rim, directing families. She put single fighters near the road, keeping children far from the entrance. Privacy screens went up for those praying about their modesty. A man asked if shelter under heaven cost kneeling. He answered before Mara could decide how to insult him. No, aid does not rent. Nobody kneels for a roof. Mara held his gaze through the rain-specked glass. Good, she said. By dusk the iron nest was ugly, crowded, cold, smoky, and alive. Then Mercy arrived. 3 wagons rolled in from the north road, pulled by men too thin to be soldiers, yet too clean to be refugees. They brought loaves stamped with a black sun pressed into the crust, alongside jugs of weak ale sealed with dark wax. The first wagoner called it Warden Voss's mercy ration. Nobody cheered. Hunger still gnawed. A little boy broke away from his mother, biting a loaf before Celeste could inspect it. He chewed twice, blinked, and collapsed into the mud. Instantly, the entire quarry went dead silent. Celeste reached him first. She pried his mouth open, smelled the bread, then slapped the loaf right out of the mother's hand. Bitter resin, she warned. Wash his mouth and nobody swallows. One wagoner bolted, but Owen cracked him with a hammer. Handle across the knees. He was already reaching for the wagons. Rage makes every big solution look clean from above. Mara stepped into his shadow, whispering no. They drugged a child to hide real refugees around the wagons. She was right again. Behind the white cloth under the wagon boards were women and elderly men packed tightly shoulder to shoulder, terrified, likely told they would be slaughtered if they moved. He withdrew his hand slowly until his arm ached. Celeste forced the child to spit, rinse, breathe, and wait, his eyes focused after a few minutes. Not fine but alive. The captured wagoner cursed her, but Celeste did not even look at him. If your god needs drugged bread, he is underqualified. Mara translated that loudly. The black sun stamp mattered too. Celeste cut it from the crust with 2 fingers wrapped in cloth, tucking it beside Sable's stolen lance tip. She did not call it evidence. Celeste disliked words that made people feel safer than facts aloud. Another wagoner heard the children crying and broke before Owen touched him. The patron wants the keeper alive, he said, eyes fixed on Mara's pendant. The rest only need to be quiet. Then he started sobbing, as if the reality had finally hit his own ears. The last wagoner broke under Owen's stare, pointing across the nest. He opened Ashwick's lane, naming Joripel, the traitor who took the Black Sun. Coined, that name moved through the iron nest like fire finding oil. Joripel was dragged from beneath a grain tarp before full dark. He was a narrow man with sawdust in his hair and a mouth desperately trying to make excuses. 2 boys clung to his coat until Owen pulled them away. Jory looked at him once like the sky might prefer explanations. A bad guess. Mara took a burned basket strap from her wrist and tied it around his hands. Then she made him walk. Mara skipped platforms, town councils, and polished trials with speeches for families who still have roofs. Mara forces him down the center aisle of the iron nest while each family he betrayed calls out exactly what his treachery cost. Lysa's roof, his brother, the water, his mother's blankets, 2 centuries of history. Jory keeps muttering about his sons, claiming they're both his only reason and his excuse. Voss had their names, Jory claims. He had cords ready. He thought if he opened one lane. Owen raises his heavy hammer. Mara does not flinch. If you strike him down, his sons learn only that fear works until someone stronger arrives. He sold us, yes, her voice cuts clean through the nest, and he does not get to buy his way back with tears. She strips the Black Sun coin from his belt pouch, takes his knife, takes his boots, and hands him a single day's bread. Then she carves a brutal message into a scrap of wagon board and shoves it against his chest. No child is currency. Carry that to Voss, she tells him. If you run, run forever. Jory looks up at him again. He could have ended him with 1 finger. Every angry part of him wanted that simple vengeance. Instead, he says nothing and lets Mara's mercy hurt far more. They drive the traitor out through the single road under armed watch. No one sleeps after that. Near midnight, Rafe finds the cords. Dozens of black cords wait under wagon axles, tucked inside Mercy loaf crates, looped around door pegs on the refugee carts that had arrived with them. Each cord carries tiny knots, paired ones with a long one at the end. Rafe's face empties when he sees them. Mara holds one up. Decorative refusal. No, he says without his usual charm or smile. This is a collection route. He looks at Finn. Before answering, child scouts return within the hour. The black cords have already appeared on homes and camp posts beyond the quarry. 1 knot for babies, 2 for children who can walk, and a long end for those old enough to carry loads. Then an escaped courier stumbles into the iron nest, face cut open and covered in mud up to his chest. He warns that Voss has ordered every child from 7 villages gathered at Gallows Field. People immediately begin checking wrists, doors, cart posts, and bed roll knots. Panic spreads faster than any scout. Mothers drag their children into the center while fathers lie about their ages. 2 former guards quietly remove their black sashes before anyone asks. And get this, the message is simple enough that even the people who hear only thunder understand the shape of it. When Mara translates, adults can worship. The courier rasps, parents can be owned. Finn touches the cord in Mara's hand. What does my knot mean? He asks. Mara closes her fist around it. For the first time tonight, she has no fast answer. He looks down through the holes of the iron nest at hundreds of people under a giant metal dome pretending to be a fortress, and understands exactly what Voss has done. Above them, his apartment is silent, except for rain ticking on the window. The dome had bought them walls, not safety. Voss has found the one door every parent will open from the inside without asking the sky first. He has stopped attacking the walls. Now he is counting children. By the 6th dawn, the iron nest does not sound like a fortress. It sounds like a steel pot with panic trapped under the lid. people pound on the metal walls until the whole quarry rings. Mothers drag children into the center and count them twice. Then count other people's children, because fear gets generous when it has nowhere useful to go. Fathers argue with former Black Banner guards over what to do. The road was watched. 3 refugee columns arrived at midnight, and 5 more by dawn. Some were half a village, all carrying news of missing children. These were no mere stories or warnings. Empty blankets, cut ropes, and tiny footprints led toward the dark road, vanishing right where heavy cartwheels had chewed the mud. Flat, by then the shelter held over 400 people beneath a giant spaghetti strainer. The holes Finn had admired the day before were now just open mouths for rain. Smoke and endless pleading. Someone was always at the pendant, begging Mara to ask Finn for help. Move this, lift that, look east, look west, tell them if their sons were still breathing. The worst requests were the ones he simply could not answer. He could not see past the silver. He could not reach every road nor make a child appear just because a mother screamed loud enough. He had not slept at all. That was probably obvious to everyone. His right hand was swollen purple from old feedback pain and sheer stupidity. Whenever someone cried out for water, food, or a lantern, a bandage, or a miracle, he reached out to help. A bottle cap, a strip of cloth, a grain sack, any tiny scrap caught under the rim. One more minor fix, one more bit of proof that he was still useful. Below, Mara stopped desperate people from beating the steel walls with cooking pans. Noise does not bring children back, she shouted. It only brought him crashing down. He remembers lowering a clay bowl toward Celeste's infirmary corner, and remembers the strange membrane grabbing his palm like cold teeth. Then the room tilted. His knees slammed the floor, his injured hands sliding under the table as if the world wanted it back. For a while, the sky shouted without him. When he finally opened his eyes, Nina Alvarez was standing over him with his apartment key in one hand and murder in her eyes. Mercer, she grumbles, tell me the tiny woman under your coffee table is ahead. Injury. Mara, only 1 inch tall and absolutely furious, glared up through the glass. Tell the tall stranger to stop staring, Mara demands. Nina looks down but stares even harder. He tried to sit, but Nina shoved him back with 2 fingers against his chest. The exact same way she used to pin drunk patients to ambulance stretchers. You missed 9 calls, she snaps. Your door was unlocked by a key I kept. Because you are exactly the kind of idiot who dies quietly. Busy, she mocks. Now you are flat on the floor beside the absolute worst aquarium in Pennsylvania. Mara touched the pendant, declaring she is not a fish. Nina's mouth opens and closes, then she kneels, her eyes going clinical because that was where her fear hid. She checked his pulse, his pupils, and the ugly bruise crawling across his palm. Below, Mara answered 3 questions through him, her own name, Finn's name, and the number of children missing from the last search. The questions were not mystical at all. Nina pointed at Mara, asking her to describe the room behind Finn's back. Mara identified the red toolbox, the useless compressor from the fryer, and the mug Nina had once thrown at him during a double shift. Finn had forgotten it, but Nina had not. She stopped trying to explain reality away after the second answer. After the third, she whispered very softly, okay, we are not calling anyone. Nina believed things that way, not with wonder, but with a solid decision. She wrapped his hand in clean gauze tight enough to make him hiss, then pulled a nitrile glove over the bandage. No bare contact, she orders. When he objects, she demands he make it possible or risk losing the hand. Below, a search party returned through the quarry. Mara turned around before anyone could speak, seeing the empty space. Finn should have been there, but his small belt knife was gone. For a brief moment, her raw and open face was truly agonizing to witness. Rafe brought the tracks, reporting simply that her brother followed the posts. Mara whispered that he was alone with a knife and too much pride. No one laughed, but the tracks proved Finn had not run blindly. He had followed the black cords carefully, keeping to the ditch grass. At the very first cart stop, he had managed to cut 1 child loose. That kid returned with rope burns on his wrist, bearing a message from Finn. He warned that adults lie when scared, which sounded exactly like Finn. Then a black flag rose at Gallows Field, right in Mara's view. They had to move because standing still meant losing the children. Mara carried the pendant, while Owen limped beside her with a hammer. Rafe guarded the left flank, while Mina stayed close to Eli. At the field, 126 children stood trapped in rings. They were held under guard around Marshal Corvin Voss himself. Eli saw him clearly, noting the field was chosen by an expert. The open ground offered zero cover and no safe path for rescue. Each ring was positioned so any missed hit would strike the hostages. Voss had successfully turned Eli's massive size into a maze of terrible choices. Children stood inside every single shadow that Eli's hands could cast. Mara stared at the black crescent at his throat and went completely, deathly still. It was not surrender, but recognition of a threat they could not name. Voss wore a clean coat, dark gloves, and polished boots. He stood beneath a tall chain frame like a king, with Captain Sable nearby. Guarded rings of children were arranged all around the two leaders. Voss touched the broken black crescent hanging opposite of Mara's silver. Mara noticed it instantly, her fingers tightening around her own pendant. Voss called out Eli Mercer's name without needing to shout. He knew Eli preferred children alive and wanted to test that limit. Eli's hand slammed against the glass, but Mina quietly urged him not to. Voss smiled up at the sky, demanding Mara hand over the silver witness by sunset. In exchange, he promised to release the majority of his young hostages. Mara spat into the mud, while Voss calmly claimed precision was mercy. With a nod, Captain Sable immediately pulled a heavy lever. An empty demonstration cage collapsed inward with a very loud wooden crunch. The noise made the children flinch, though Voss claimed no one was hurt. He warned them not to force him into being less theatrical. Eli wanted him gone completely, but there was no clean target. Children stood trapped inside every single shadow Eli's hand could cast. Some of the older children understood exactly how Voss was using them. Finn stood near the second ring, keeping his chin lifted defiantly. He tried to look bored but failed, as Voss looked toward Mara. Voss called her necklace a doorway, telling her to bring it over for the kids. Mara remained silent as they slowly pulled back into a rock hollow. They planned before sunset, because pretending was far better than screaming at the sky. He flatly refused before she could speak. With enough heard, Owen agreed firmly that they would not trade her. Mara looked between them, dryly noting she had apparently become communal property. He protested that it was not like that, but she demanded the truth. Leaning closer, he told her she could not just surrender to their enemy. The heavy silence that followed was suffocating, as Nag gripped his shoulder tightly. Mara slowly touched her pendant, whispering of a life free from absolute commands. She questioned if oaths only mattered when given to those without real power. He argued this was different, but her harsh words made him hate her momentarily. It was a shameful feeling. He warned her Voss would keep Finn, her, and everyone. Voss would take whatever he wanted, because ruthless men never make fair trades. She knew that, prompting him to ask why they pretended to have choices. It was for the listening parents. Behind them, Rafe stood perfectly still. Mara took Rafe's hand to steady herself. Watching from above, he saw it. A silver chip flashed between their palms, the hidden sliver. He froze. She closed his fingers around it, whispering for him to go to Iron Nest. He had to go to the nest first, not to Eli. She demanded an oath. Rafe warned her that it had better be a heavy oath, and she quietly agreed. He should have stopped her right then, or at least warned Owen about it. Instead, he only begged Mara not to do this. She looked up, changing. Her face grew sadder as she told him to ask before forbidding her. She walked out of the hollow before anyone could turn their resolve into a trap. The exchange happened at sunset. Mara stepped into the guarded rings completely alone. Her hands were visible, and Owen's burned strap was tied around her wrist. She had no armor or escort, carrying their only remaining hope of survival. Voss watched her approach like a welcome guest. Sable ordered her to kneel. Mara did not slow down. Voss stopped Sable before he could act physically. He said they only needed her useful parts. Still, he desperately calculated. Calculating attack angles, he hoped logic could justify what he wanted next. When Mara reached the outer ring, the first rope gates finally creaked open. Sobbing children stumbled toward the carts as terrified parents rushed forward. Owen and Delac cleared lanes through the crowd while Celeste checked the children. She checked for shock and fever. From above, Nat quietly counted them. Mara stopped 10 paces from Voss, demanding the release of more children. The freed children did not run heroically. Instead, they tripped and panicked. They searched for siblings, pulling away from hands in their sheer terror. Fear knows no logic. One terrified girl clung to Mara's passing skirt. She begged her not to go. Mara gently pried her fingers away. Her push toward Celeste's line almost completely broke his spirit. It was not the enemy's cruel smiles, but Mara comforting a child. She was comforting them on her way to becoming the trade. More ran. But Finn did not run. He was spotted among 46 children held inside. A black banner guard stood beside each child to enforce absolute silence. Finn screamed something, but Sable grabbed his coat and threw him back. His bandaged hand descends. The field darkens beneath his heavy palm. Voss slides a child under each shadow. He places them gently. Careful, Mercer, Voss warns him. Gods are judged by what they touch. Mara looks up from the wagon and screams for him to stop. His hand hovers. Mara reaches up to unclasp the silver. The moment it leaves her throat, the entire world shudders. The projected image tightens. Voss reaches out with two cloth-covered fingers. He avoids touching her bare skin. Voss murmurs that it is half a door. Close enough for Mara to carry. He mocks her prayer bell. Mara slaps his hand away, demanding he release the carts first. Voss opens one rope gate, but not for Finn or the children. Just insurance, Voss says coldly. Mara's mouth hardens at his words. She claims he promised the majority. Voss says he was precise. She hands him the pendant. For one last breath, Mercer sees everything. Voss passes the silver to Sable, who locks it inside a box. Mara's voice grows faint. She says Rafe still has what matters. Sable instantly locks thin metal cuffs around her wrists, sealing her fate. Finn sees this and panics, shouting her name until he is gagged. Voss bows toward Mercer's reflection, thanking him for his incredible restraint. If hatred could cross this glass, Voss would have burned alive. The wagons move. Mercer follows them as far as the world allows. Nina keeps calling his name, but he doesn't answer. The view distorts. As the silver retreats in Voss's box, Mercer slams his fist down. His punch rattles the brass rim. The road buckles like an earthquake. The carriage jolts violently. Horses scream. Mara is thrown against the side. Her chained hands rise too late. Nina grabs Mercer's wrist in terror. Stop, she begs, you're hurting them. That finally breaks his trance. He stops, driven by pure fear. Mara looks through the fading projection. Through a tiny tear in the gray, he spots blood on her wagon floor. Nina stares at the brass rim, breathing fast, whispering there is an iris. He demands answers, but she tells him to stop breaking their way back. The view shrinks to Mara's face behind the slats. No fear, only command. Learn to trust us, she orders, her voice fading into static. Trust us before you lose us. Then, the silver crosses the line. The table goes entirely gray. The road, Mara, and Finn are all gone. His bandaged hand shakes above the empty glass. Nina keeps calling his name. Her voice is a lifeline in the dark. For hours, Mercer stares. He speaks to the gray glass, offering endless apologies to the void. Nina lets him try the reasonable methods first. Soft whispers, gentle touches. His wrapped palm hovers over the brass rim, searching for signs. She watches him like a patient at a crime scene. Nothing answers. No road, no cage, no Mara shouting, just flat, dirty static. The blinding static is bright enough to hurt, leaving him completely breathless. He suggests cutting the brass rim, but Nina doesn't look up from his hand. If that cracks the glass, she warns, they might lose their way back. This was not a plan, it was grief armed with a screwdriver. He hated how fast she learned the rules. She forced him to drink actual water from his side of the world, a safe place. Nobody's child drowned in cups over there, then. She made him eat a dry protein bar. Staring at Gray, he swallowed. Cardboard and shame. 20 minutes later, the table blinked. It was not open or live the way it had been with Mara's pendant. A small bright patch snapped into focus inside the gray, no whiter than his palm from where he stood. A hand filled it, a tiny, dirty, shaking hand. Rafe Calder's hand, between his fingers lay. The silver sliver Mara had hidden from him. He almost laughed. He almost cried, doing neither because Naz's fingers dug into his shoulder hard enough to remind him he still had bones. Rafe's face leaned in, swollen. Under one eye, rain on his beard, his charm scraped to the nerve. Before you trust me, he said, you need the worst part. The view was useless. In precious 20 feet of iron nest, some colander wall, mud, and a half-finished shutter. Owen's boots stood at the edge. Celeste's gray skirt moved in and out like a blade. Outside that circle, the world ended. Rafe stepped back 3 paces and vanished, then stepped in and reappeared. Now called it an extremely small miracle. Just the story of his budget, he muttered. His voice sounded hollow. Rafe held the sliver toward the sky, saying it follows this, not him. Nor the nest. Owen's voice suddenly cut in from just outside their small circle. Then chain him to a post, Celeste answered. Rafe joked about his personality. But Celeste flatly cut him off. That was the last joke they got. For a while, Rafe knelt in the mud, setting the sliver on a flat stone where he could see it. He marked Anwen's door. The little circle went silent, he thought. He had misheard. He desperately wanted to be wrong. Rafe looked at the gray sky and nodded to Owen. Cowardice, honesty, and rain made his face look older. Months before the second sky opened, Voss's riders were hunting stolen grain. Or so they had told him, an old woman with hidden stores, a daughter running night roots and a boy. He put a sign on her lane and took a black sun coin. Owen enters the circle and talk about instant payback, dropping Rafe with one brutal blow. Rafe hits. The mud rolled and did not raise his hands. Good or bad, not enough or too much. His head could not process the moral categories fast enough. Celeste stepped between them, demanding children first. Owen's hammer shook in his fist. He put the bolt. Anwen, Rafe muttered through a swollen lip that he only opened the road for the man who did. It was worse than defense. Every part of him wanted to throw Rafe out of the circle and shut the sky on his face. Instead, he stared at the sliver. Mara had given it to him. Mara knew he was dirty before he did, yet she still chose the only man who could navigate Voss's roads, while every honest soul was being watched. Mara's hidden sliver became their first real vote after she was taken. No one voted by a show of hands, since they lacked that kind of civilization. Owen wanted Rafe bound with a wagon chain. Delau wanted him watched by mothers who had lost children, which felt even less humane. Celeste wanted his face wrapped so he would not drip on the sliver and ruin their only remaining chance. Nah. Leaned over his shoulder, advising him to ask what they needed from them. He knew what they needed, but if so, why were they still arguing? That should not have helped, but it did. He presses his bandaged hand against the glass. He can only lower small items into that tiny circle, only small, light things like cords and water. He remains blind to everything outside. Unable to protect them, Owen stares up at the dark sky, silent. Unwillingly, Owen grunts. They must stop promising safety and help build a real lethal trap instead. Owen mutters, basically a love poem, speaking in his exhausted local language. He asks if they can reach the child convoy, while Rafe wipes his mouth. Yes, they will use him, but never forgive him. Owen looks up at him with pure hatred, as if his own words had been stolen right from his mouth. After Owen speaks, Rafe nods. After is more than he deserves. The gray around the sliver flickers. For a single breath, the 20-foot circle blinks out, and the entire world snaps elsewhere. A dark-covered wagon appears. Mara is chained to a ringbolt, her wrists bruised. Voss sits across, holding the silver pendant unwrapped between black-gloved fingers. Suddenly, the entire vision vanishes back to Rafe's mud. He whispers Mara's name, and Nena leans in closer, asking if it was live. The vision flashes again. Voss tilts the pendant so Mara can hear him clearly. He knows the Watcher might be looking, and that is exactly the point. Voss mocks her, saying her giant is smaller without a sky. Mara's lip is bruised, but she smiles. Most men shrink once they measure themselves. Voss's politeness does not crack. He claims her god hid above glass while they starved, sending food only to feel merciful. He plays man only when godhood becomes inconvenient. He feels Nena's tense gaze on him as Mara leans forward in her chains, which bite her wrists. Starvation is called order, she spits, because murder sounds common. Voss watches her like a locked box he wants to hear click, asking if she truly believes. He wants partnership. He wants absolution. She kneels and he forgives. Himself, the god asked him to stand but forbade her to choose. That cuts deep. Mara does not look up. Voss smiles, whispering that she hated herself too. Voss draws a small pin and the flash cuts out. When it returns, blood marks her palm. He presses that bright drop to the silver edge, warming the pendant blindingly hot. Nena swears under her breath, watching the intense, burning glow. This is definitely no gateway yet, just raw, intense heat and a single red mark. Voss watches the reaction coldly, like a man confirming a mathematical equation. Elsewhere, Wraith carries the sliver down a narrow, sunlit road. They can only see what lies within the tiny circle: 2 rock walls, a rut, and Owen's shoulder. 3 scouts crouch low, near a loop of cotton cord he had lowered with tweezers. Outside the circle, they hear carts, children, harness bells, and sharp commands. This restricted view makes their desperate plan feel like performing surgery during a blazing fire. Wait, Rafe whispers. Through the glass, he had lowered 6 cotton loops. No divine thunder here, just thick, soft cotton lines waiting in the dirt. For Mara's people to anchor behind stones near the children's carts, they form unseen ankle-high traps. The lead horses enter the narrow cut, Rafe waits until the second wagon crosses the first hidden loop. Suddenly, he lifts the sliver and commands. Now Owen yanks the heavy log barrier down. The scouts pull the cord. Lines tight, wagon wheels jump, horses scream, and guards stumble blindly forward. Into thin air, he could have easily reached through the glass to save them, but he holds back. The circle is too small, and the children are too close. He only felt useful while someone smaller paid the bill, so he held a lantern above the glass instead, giving Owen one clean patch of light through. The sliver, he used it to knock a guard's spear free instead of striking. His head, the kids did the rest because Finn had already started before anyone arrived. He had sawed through his gag on a cart nail, using that nail on the rope of the smallest girl beside him. His face was gray, one eye swollen, but his hands were steady. Finn, he whispered. The boy could not hear him. A guard grabbed him by the collar. The girl he had freed bit the guard's thumb. Owen hit the man low. Rafe took a spear butt to the side and still kept the sliver up. Sable fought his way through the crowd with 3 mounted men. Not toward the children, but toward escape. He saw the rear guard folding, saw the carts compromised, and chose the message over the cargo. Rigid men are predictable until fear reminds them they are alive. Within 6 frantic minutes, 46 children were out of chains. They were not safe, not that fast. 2 scouts were injured. Rafe could barely breathe. One boy cradled a badly hurt arm. Finn collapsed only after he counted the smaller children twice and insulted Owen for counting wrong. That told him the boy was alive, annoyingly and beautifully. They pulled him into the circle. For the first time since the table went gray, Finn touched the silver sliver and heard him. Hey, he said, because genius apparently abandons you at the emotional finish line. Finn stared upward. You look terrible. Same to you. Good. His mouth trembled. Then he looked away. Before relief could embarrass him, he had heard guards talking while they thought the gag made him furniture. Sable was taking the chapel road to Gallows Crown. Voss had a black stone socket behind an altar. Finn did not know what a socket was. He described it as a mouth in the wall for the dark necklace. Mina wrote that down on the back of an unpaid electric bill. The full view snapped open again at evening. This time it was not a wagon. It was a chapel cut into black stone high above the road. Mara stood restrained before circular wall frame, silver pendant in Voss's hand, dark crescent at his throat. A thin red mark touched both edges now, not enough to explain anything, yet too much to ignore. Voss pressed the halves near each other. The image split. For 1 second, his table showed 2 rooms. One was Gallows Crown's chapel, torchlit and wet with old smoke. The other was a modern stainless workbench, white tile, a pane of dark glass, a red leather glove pressing flat against it. From the far side, a calm male voice came through, clean as a lab sink. Window 3, unauthorized observer confirmed. Nass stopped breathing beside him. Voss flinched, not much, but enough. The voice continued, do not improvise again, Warden. Assets are replaceable. The silver is not me. Heard it too. He saw the exact moment she understood. Voss served someone larger and hated being reminded. She looked at him through her smoke-matted hair. Your God talks to you like a tool. Voss's hand tightened. The red glove shifted against the glass. Break the refuge. Bring the witness and the silver to the fixed aperture when resistance is quiet. Then the split snapped shut. He stood over his blank, bright table, with Na's hand gripping his sleeve and the taste of metal in his mouth. Another room, another observer, another hand. He had spent 6. After days of being mistaken for a god, Voss brought a realer monster to the fight. And it wore leather. Night fell blood red over the road to Iron Nest. A fleeting glimpse from the pendant showed only fragments, never enough to see the whole. Mara sat locked in an iron cage at the front, with Sable riding clothes. Voss rode behind the front rank, somehow clean, making the young man hate him even more. It was a petty, useful rage. Black Banner soldiers marched in 2 rigid columns. Between them trudged hundreds of conscripts, holding rusty farm tools and cheap spears. Stomachs too empty for courage. They were women, old men, and young boys. They were just tall enough to serve, but far too young for any mercy. Voss had spread his lies well. A fake sky would strike down deserters. Rumors claimed Iron Nest hid stolen children, and that Mara begged for obedience. Through one sudden flash of light, Mara scratched a message onto her cage floor. Using a bent nail, even with her heavy chains, she still found time to write. It was a crooked, perfect warning. Avoid the crowd and break their command. Do not attack the citizens, target the leaders. Then the viewing pendant went dark. Back at Iron Nest, war horns blared through the dim light as Owen stood ready. He gripped his heavy hammer, thigh tightly bandaged, while Celeste hurried the children inside. They hid in the deepest shelter. Nearby, Rafe leaned against a rock with broken ribs. He clutched his crystal sliver, letting out a dark laugh because confession changed nothing. His truth had not killed him yet, but now he had to survive the aftermath. Nena looked at him. He wanted to pretend he had some grand plan to fix this. Instead, he just stared down at the small projection, unable to see the massive army. He was blind to their march unless Voss allowed it, Mara's words burning in his mind. For once, his only smart play was simply making sure he did not die first. The horns of iron nest wailed again. At dawn, Voss arrived with Mara in chains. He forced her cage to face the fortress, deliberately keeping her back turned to him. That silent gesture spoke volumes. Through the fading signal, he saw only muddy ground. He glimpsed Owen's heavy boots and heard Rafe gasping through his broken, aching ribs. Then Voss uncovered his relic, and the view suddenly cleared across the entire front line. Mara was locked inside a cramped iron cage, her chained wrists pulled up high. The strain made her shoulders tremble as Sable sat nearby, keeping watch. He kept his crossbow aimed straight through the bars at her back, behind them. The Black Banner troops formed two rigid columns, in between those harsh lines. Conscripts held farm spears and kitchen knives, their hungry faces showing no hope. No one was saving them for free. Voss rode behind the cage, spotless. His coat was buttoned tight, his silver relic hanging loosely from a dark loop. The dark crescent rested against his collar, right over a stained, bloody cloth wrap. Mara spotted the blood-stained cloth as well, but her cold expression never wavered. That was how he knew she was hurting. Voss raised his gloved hand calmly. He spoke smoothly, order your refuge to lay down their weapons. Tell your false sky to surrender. Beside her, Sable pressed the crossbow closer. Mara looked toward the fort, then at the starved, deceived crowd around her. She asked with a dry smile, which title means coward hiding behind children. He absolutely loved her fearless timing, even if it risked both their lives. Voss only smiled, telling her to preach, as she reached for the bars. Her chains scraping, she shouted out. The sky was listening. Listen carefully before someone prettier lies to you. A few looked up. Most kept staring at the muddy ground, knowing any look could draw deadly attention. Inside Iron Nest, Eli saw only quick flashes through Rake's weak circle. Kids huddled behind the shutters, Delau wrapped arrows. She marked arrow tips clearly so her brave people could easily distinguish friends from enemies. Celeste dragged a boy from a firing slit by his ear. They were ready. But they were one bad order away from shooting hungry neighbors. Voss pushed them forward. The trap was never really the cage or the heavy crossbow. The trap was making mercy look like hesitation. Eli Mercer is not a god, Mara said. Those words hit Iron Nest harder than arrows. Eli felt Nat turn toward him. Mara kept going, shouting to everyone that Eli gets hurt, panics, and makes costly mistakes. He poisoned children because he did not know any better, she loudly yelled. She had rejected him more times than she had eaten this week. Voss watched, satisfied. Mara pointed her chained hand at Voss. That man knows exactly what he is doing. Every burned wagon and every stolen child was no mistake. That was pure ownership. A tense murmur quickly rippled through the conscripts. Mara's voice sharpened as she demanded they drop their weapons and walk far away. If they leave the Black Banner, Eli will absolutely not crush them, she promised. She urged them to ask why Voss needed them standing against mercy. Then a single weapon dropped near the left column. A dull spear hit the mud. Another fell. Voss's smile thinned as he ordered Sable to act. The Black Banner rear line immediately began driving forward through the conscripts. Raising shields and lowering spear points, they had absolutely no intention of charging the fort. They forced people back. Mara's message burned. Avoid the crowd and break command. He stared at the clear lid. He had stared at a thick plastic lid on his counter since midnight. He had sworn he would eat, but he simply could not. This was no weapon but a divider. Now watched his hand move, a clean line. No, an ugly line was still better than a grave line, so Eli lowered it. Watch this closely. The massive clear wall slams down right on the battlefield. It fell between the black rear line and the wavering conscripts. It was not perfect, but the bottom edge bit deep into the mud and kicked up dust. Soldiers on both sides could see each other. That mattered. It did not stop the battle, but it completely changed the entire shape of it. That mattered. A wall cannot make cowards brave, but it buys 1 second. 1 second where their screaming tormentors could not reach their throats was more than enough. It let the first mother pull her son sideways, others quickly followed. The fear began moving away from Voss instead of toward their fortress. A black banner spear struck the clear barrier and instantly bounced straight back from it. Another tried climbing it, only to slide down with both hands squeaking loudly on the plastic. Owen's voice rolled from the gate. No shots hit the unarmed people. Only black cloth. Archers fired precisely through the defense holes without hitting the crowd. They carefully avoided the crowd, hitting only enemy banners and shields. As officers drove people forward, Delaz refugees used ropes to open up escape gaps. Conscripts stumbled away from the front line, some carrying weeping children. Others helping the wounded, some falling to their knees in pure disbelief. Freedom came faster than they could process. Voss didn't even shout. That quiet was terrifying. The magical sliver pulled everyone's attention sideways. Wraith. Heavy black cloak now. For a second, it looked like Owen knocked him. Cold and stole the uniform, which would be incredibly rude yet efficient. But then Rafe lifted his bruised face and gave a terrible salute. With his broken, bleeding nose, he walked behind the clear barrier with two defectors wearing stolen sashes, hiding the magical sliver in his bloody cuff. Beyond that 20-foot gap lay the rear stockade, filled with collared laborers, wounded prisoners, and two carts holding exhausted children and terrified guards staring blankly at the impossible wall. Rafe barked out, "Retreat order," claiming the warden wanted witnesses alive. One guard hesitated. But Sable was currently busy being divided by kitchenware. Rafe said, "Move." It almost worked, and honestly, almost is where Rafe Calder always lived. A scarred guard stared too closely and shouted his name. Rafe opened the pen. The guard slammed a spear butt into his ribs. Rafe collapsed, wheezing, but kept his hand locked on the bar. A captive woman pulled from inside. The gate flew open. Out poured people not brave, just entirely done with being owned. They didn't march out like legendary heroes. They staggered, broken and weary. Some shielded their eyes because the harsh daylight felt like another trick. An old man tried to salvage a bundle of rags until a tiny girl stopped him. She slapped his arm, screaming that it was empty. Voss stored prisoners, not soldiers. Rafe crawled painfully toward the second lock. Someone pleaded with him to leave it. But he couldn't hear any warnings over the sliver's roar, and he wouldn't listen anyway. It seemed courage and absolute stupidity wore the exact same coat. He reached Mara's cage cart just as another heavy blow crashed into him. His bloodied fingers jammed something deep under the hinge. A pin shifted slightly. Not enough to free her, but enough to make the metal groan. Then, guards dragged him. Under the wagon, out of sight, Owen watched him fall, his expression instantly changing. For the first time, Owen looked like holding onto hatred was too exhausting. The freed prisoners rushed the rear line. Voss responded by burning his own supplies. He pointed directly at the massive grain wagons parked behind his forces. They were covered in canvas with fake mercy markings. He ordered them burned. One soldier hesitated. Voss turned to him. "Food is for the obedient. Burn it." Torches flew through the air. Canvas ignited. Burning oil dripped down the wheels. The choking smell of burning grain reached far across the battlefield, heavy and suffocating. Sacks split open under the intense heat, spilling pale kernels directly into the flames. The conscripts stared in shock, huge, full wagons of precious food burning. Voss had marched them hungry while blaming the iron nest for their starvation. A starving woman screamed, lunging at a black banner guard with a hoe. A young boy desperately grabbed at the burning grain before being dragged back. Celeste's runners saved him. Men who had dropped their weapons suddenly picked them up. But this time they turned their rage directly on the black banners. Sable rode through the smoke, screaming for water as a young girl called him father. From the family wagons, he looked toward her, then froze when Voss stared back. The pause was tiny, but it mattered. Mara seized the moment. The cage hin snapped where Rafe had jammed the metal pin. She slammed her shoulder into the door. Once, then twice. On the third strike, it burst open, dumping her onto the cartwheel. Sable lunged for her, but Owen hurled his heavy hammer, barely missing Sable's head. It smashed into the cage frame, making the entire cart jump. Talk about subtle work. From Owen Pike, highly delicate, basically pure diplomacy using heavy iron, Mara did not wait for things to improve. She leaped off the cart, charging straight at Voss. He drew his blade. She ducked under, rolling through mud and burning grain coming up with a broken cage pin clamped in her fist. Voss tried to retreat, but prisoners blocked him. Conscripts shoved from the other side, for the first time since the giant first saw him. Corvin Voss was trapped in a crowd he could not control. Me snatched at his belt her. Fingers locking onto the silver half. Voss grabbed her wrist, saying no. Me bared. Her teeth funny, she sneered. She was going to say that about the march. She pressed her. Scraped palm against his old red-stained wrapping, twisted, and ripped the silver piece. Free, suddenly the world slammed open with loud color, sound, and shouting. Burning mud, steel, smoke, and Mara's voice ringing in the giant's head so clearly it hurt. Second, the entire battlefield seemed to hold its breath. The conscripts saw Mara holding. The silver, the Iron Nest faction saw her alive. Both saw every lie he stacked. Between those two truths start crumbling away, and the giant finally understood the truth. Once missed in Gallows Field, Mara never needed the giant to rule the sky, she just needed the protector to keep it open long enough to use. Ceiling, she snapped. The giant almost cried at that nickname. Terrible timing. On brand, though. Your call, the giant replied. Get them out, she commanded. Conscripts first, then her. There it was. The repair, no apologies, no fanfare. Just an unwanted order and the simple chance to obey. The giant tilted the transparent container lid down, making a clear ramp. Across the thick mud between Iron Nest and the broken front line, its far corner. Cracked from a black banner axe strike, the giant held firm anyway, gloved hand creaking over a bandage. Owen roared for them to move. Conscripts slid, crawled, and dragged one another. Across the lid while Iron Nest fighters provided cover, children pressed against. The inside of the colander, silent behind shutter slits, Celeste smacked a wounded man who tried to collapse in the escape lane, forcing him to crawl. Even faster, Mara climbed onto the lid last while Voss lunged for her ankle. Save. Blocked Owen from reaching Voss, not out of mercy, but simply obeying his given orders. Mara kicked Voss's reaching hand away, breaking free from his desperate grasp, and slid down the clear plastic toward Iron Nest like a deeply furious saint. Completely ignoring proper transport rules, the giant wanted to shelter her under protective hands. Forever, but decided to lift those fingers away instead. She rolled off the cracked edge into Owen's arms, pushing him away before he could look relieved, immediately hanging the silver amulet. Round her neck with trembling hands, everyone watched. Voss stood beyond the burning wagons, lips bleeding, coat scorched, a dark crescent at his throat. Round him, his forces shattered. They were just scattered pieces, choosing different directions. He saw it too. His voice finally rose, ordering a retreat to Gallows Crown. The Black Banner elite forces pulled back around him. Sable rode closely at their flank, 2 men. Dragged Rafe away by his arms, dazed but still desperately guarding his metal cuff. He was still held tight to his chest. Mara saw him, and so did Owen, but nobody could reach him through the raging flames without abandoning the survivors they had just saved. Voss left them with the wreckage, burned food, severe injuries, and the guilty captive he knew they could not leave behind. As the caravan climbed the northern road, the silver around Mara's throat turned freezing cold, then burning hot, the dark crescent on. Voss's chest pulsed back across the distance. For a fleeting second, his voice and another voice came through. It was calm and modern, commanding them to open at dawn. Bring the witness if she follows. If she refuses, burn down the refuge. Until she does, bring that observer. Na's hand tightened on the table beside his. Mara looked up, her face blackened with smoke and her lip bruised, but she was alive. Well, she murmured softly, just for him, now. He has gone and made it rude not to visit. The magical viewport flickered near the retreating cart. Rafe was finally awake enough to scratch a crooked mark into the wood using a nail hidden in a place nobody wanted to think about. A hook, a stare, and a black mouth. Behind him, a painted chapel woman loomed briefly. Board stood full-sized beside a giant face. He did not know why that mattered, bruised and half-wrapped in Celeste's blanket. He touched the silver and stared. That is the chapel road, he whispered. The mouth in the wall. Behind them, Iron Nest cheered because Mara was finally free. In front of them, Voss carried Rafe and the black half toward Gallows Crown. The grain wagons burned, making the evening smell like a bakery. On fire, at dawn, heaven would become a door Voss intended to open. Finn drew the mouth in the wall, while Voss's grain wagons were still burning. He sketched with charcoal on the back of a split crate, one swollen eye held half shut. Celeste's blanket slipped off his shoulder whenever he leaned forward. Round him, Iron Nest sounded like victory had limped home. People cheered loudly. Because Mara was free, food was ash, the wounded waited in silence because complaints got you moved to Celeste. Celeste was terrifying enough even without a cue. In the distance, burned wagons kept popping. A sack split open inside the flames, as if Voss were still feeding the fire despite losing the battle. Every cheer carried smoke, and every single survival plan started with a question about who would eat tomorrow. Mara sat beside Finn with the silver halfback around her neck and her slashed palm wrapped in gray cloth. The pendant made the entire quarry crystal clear again. Full view, full sound, full responsibility. You can feel the dread as he realizes what this means, wishing. It came with a volume knob. Finn scratched a circle there, marking the black. Mouse now leaned over his table, one hand on her notebook, the other holding his wrist back because trust still required constant supervision. Draw the frame around it again, she ordered. Finn glared up, humoring the tall stranger. He did a poor job. The circle had grooves like teeth. Behind it he drew 3 chains in the floor, and a woman standing beside a face far too large for any ordinary chapel. Nina went completely still. What he asked, now pointed beneath the brass rim, then at the iron nest spring clamp. Same curve, same capture motion. Whatever opens this should close it. Celeste, soot and medicine stains covering both. Cuffs crossed herself once at Finn's drawing. Mara noticed she knew it. He saw half of that mark was painted over in a convent infirmary. Celeste mentioned 2 mirrors. One Rode, the sister who explained it, was removed before supper. Nobody dared to ask where she went. Nobody wanted that answer before dawn. Celeste wiped charcoal dust off her thumb and looked at Mara instead of Mercer, correct, but still bruising his ego. Whatever this thing was, it did not belong to the tall idiot upstairs. Simply because that tall idiot had a better view, Mara touched the silver and repeated the words Anwen had left behind. Mercer's mother called their line keepers. She spoke of black and silver together, letting the small walk tall and tall reach. The small, her voice stayed flat until the end. He thought she meant spirits. Mothers love leaving awful riddles behind without explaining a single thing. Rural parenting sounds efficient, Mina remarked. Mara gave her a tired look. She asked if all tall women insult grief, only when it gets people hurt. Celeste tapped the emblem Finn drew, 1 opening, 90 heartbeats and 1 drop from the witness. The quarry felt smaller around those words, 90 seconds. Now muttered, maybe, Mercer replied. She stared at him. He hated that. His voice went dry, both halves a fixed socket, 1 drop from a keeper, a short crossing. That is what they know, but it is not enough to use safely. Mara lifted her bandaged palm, noting Voss already has his drop. Mina asked about the black half and the place built for it. Mercer looked at the iron rim under his own table, suggesting they close this side, lock it, and break the lever if needed. Mara stared upward. He heard his mistake before she even spoke. It was horrible progress. If they close the sky, Rafe stays caged while Voss keeps the black mouth. Tomorrow he burns whoever refuses to drag her back. Voss wants her head so he can get in line. That shouldn't have comforted Mercer, but it did. It spoke volumes about his priorities. They would have to assault Gallows Crown. Mara declared they must free Rafe and reach the chapel before dawn. If the door opens, it will be on their terms. Owen pointed down the burning road with his hammer, noting half their fighters are wounded and the grain is gone. Rafe is in a cart if he is even breathing, yet they want to deliver the key. Mara agreed, warning that if they do not act, Voss will return with fire and a much heavier hand. No one liked hearing that cold truth. Truth has a habit of kicking the door down. The crowd heard only pieces through Mara's translation, but they understood. A living wraith meant another massive debt. Voss opening heaven meant tomorrow would bring no defense. It would be a slaughter. Mara's eyes sharpened as Mercer spoke up. He forced the words out, asking her to share the plan first. Instead of blindly forbidding things like a fool, Naz's grip eased off his wrist. Mara stared at him, whispering that he could be taught. The plan waited until the injured were moved and the fallen covered. The truth Mercer avoided did not. Mara asked why stopping felt so impossible. To him, he looked away from the table, but Na kept her gaze steady. She once held pressure on his brother's wound, while Mercer froze 7 feet away. Unable to move, so he told Mara about Jonah without any heroic spin. A warehouse fire, a collapsed rack, thick smoke on the floor, his brother pinned. Where Mercer could see his hand moving, 7 seconds of absolute, terrifying clarity. And his head did not. 7 seconds of Nena screaming his name. 7 seconds he had polished into a weapon to carry around for 3 years. He moved, he spoke, then the ceiling collapsed. Nena's quiet voice reminded him he was concussed, his mask. Seal was cracked. He was not just standing there. He died, and she agreed. She added that he turned the rest of his life into a punishment with tools. Mara touched the pendant with her good hand. Voss controls people so he never has to. Feel helpless again, his throat tightened but she did not soften it. You. Control danger, trapping people inside. Was that comfort? She said absolutely not. It was supposed to be useful, very useful, he agreed. She leaned closer, kneading. Not a rescue override, not his hand grabbing whoever. Scares him most, 90 seconds, and he must ask before taking, he wanted to promise. Perfectly, he had learned what perfect promises were worth. He could try, he said. Mara nodded. That was less pretty, but she trusted it more. After that, they prepared. Both battlefields, the phrase sounded grand, but in practice, it meant Nena and him. Arguing over which end of a fire extinguisher should face the man trying to take his head off, while below, Mara argued with 3 injured people who overdoing everything to prove loyalty. Let's be real, war is mostly bad. Logistics, wearing dramatic clothes, Nina cleared his workbench with the violence of a woman who had opinions about clutter and apocalypse. Tools hit the floor, a cracked toaster, 3 invoices, and a mug he liked all got. Exiled, she positioned the fire extinguisher by his left knee, wedged the stairwell door half shut with a toolbox, and tested the iris lever under the brass rim until it clicked once, making every tiny person below flinch, shouting sorry. She called down, most heard thunder, but Mara translated it as a tall woman saying the sky had hinges and poor manners. Mina pointed, saying she liked her. Below, Mara chose one modern object and refused the rest, the cooling rack from his counter descended under her direction, a rectangular grid of chrome bars that would span the citadel moat if he did not sneeze and invent a new tragedy. She also accepted one heavy shoelace for a descent line. When he offered zip ties, a flashlight, tape, tweezers, and a paring knife, she held up her wrapped hand, saying more options just meant he was trying to be everywhere. He quietly shut the drawer. Meanwhile, Owen assigned front fighters. Despite his stiff thigh, Celeste set retreat points, putting Finn in her rear. Cart with the copied chapel sketch safely out of the assault line. Dela took the defectors who knew Black Banner horn calls. Finn objected until Mara said that useful boys survived by carrying maps instead of chasing heroics. He accepted it, offended but alive and already complaining loudly. Near midnight they left Iron Nest. Before Mara stepped beyond the colander rim, she made the rescued conscripts choose to either stay guarded behind shutters or walk. With the assault under Ashwick command, some stayed, some went. Nobody was thanked for either choice. That was new and maybe what freedom looked like before it learned better manners. Mara carried the silver. The world moved with her across a road striped black by burned grain smoke. Every step toward Gallows Crown made the pendant warmer. Every time it pulsed, Nena looked at the iris lever. Every time Nena looked at the lever, he wanted to close it. He did. Gallows Crown loomed before dawn like a jagged black tooth above the road. Voss had built it around starvation, a narrow bridge, dry moat, and prison cages along the outer wall, so every prisoner could see the granary doors and smell what they were forbidden from touching. Rafe was somewhere inside. Mara stopped at the moat and looked up. Now they lowered the cooling rack. The bars struck stone on their side, bounced and nearly slid into the waterless ditch. Owen and 2 defectors threw hooks around the nearest crossbar. From the far wall, hands reached through, catching the other end. Some prisoners were not theirs. A few still wore Black Banner ration tags. Some had the hollow stare of people who were promised bread for obedience but received heavy chains instead. They pulled before any guard realized this miracle was a bridge. Arrows hit chrome and sang. One fighter slipped between the bars, catching himself by his elbows, shouting while enemy boots crowded around his fingers. Owen grabbed his collar and hauled him up one-handed. A woman behind him caught an arrow high in the shoulder. Guard but kept crawling. Stopping on this makeshift rack meant falling to her death. It made onlookers want to shield them, but they had to keep moving. Mara did not even look up. Do not, she said, you are thinking too loudly. Then cross faster. She did. The outer yard turned chaotic, nothing clean or cinematic about it. Prisoners yanked guards down from behind while defectors shouted false orders. Delaz people cut cage ropes, and Celeste's runners pulled the first freed children under a stone awning. No more barriers were lowered. It felt like standing by a fire with full buckets, warned that the watcher would destroy the house. Mara followed Finn's route mark through a service arch and down a passage stained with old smoke. There, they found Rafe hanging from a wall ring outside the chapel stairs. His face looked like the floor had argued with him repeatedly in one. He saw Mara and still managed a smile that clearly deserved medical attention. You came, he rasped. Mara cut his wrist rope, mentioning his scrawled directions saying she is very obedient when annoyed. Rafe fell against Owen, who caught him like a sack of grain he hated carrying. Talk, Mara demanded. Rafe did. No ornaments, no gambler silk left. His words came in painful fragments because breathing hurt, and for once he did not dress up his guilt. Voss was not saving grain for winter. Orders from the Red Glove demanded they burn surplus. Before it fed rebels, carvers, glassmakers, and metal hands. Keep them hungry enough to work and send master messages through the black aperture. Rafe swallowed his pain, the straight steel, black sun coins, and the cruel tools his officers called holy. They descended through that dark place. The famine was in order, laid over bad harvests. Voss made hunger worse because starving fingers carved cheaper. The passage fell silent except for the battle raging above. Mara's face remained completely stone. Her fingers tightened around Anwen's leather strap. That is why her mother ran, she realized. Rafe nodded, confirming she stole the silver after seeing him open a slit. He had marked her door before knowing. That did not make it any better. Rafe saw Jory displayed at the north gate with Mara's board. Voss had executed Jory for returning empty-handed. No, Mara said, it makes the debt accurate. They climbed upward. The chapel at Gallows Crown was smaller than they expected and far uglier than it deserved to be. Black stone, a circular frame in the there were chain grooves in the floor, exactly where Finn had drawn them. The mural above the altar showed a woman no taller than Mara standing full size beside a giant face with the paint around her eyes completely worn away. Around the frame, ancient finger marks had worn the stone smooth, as if generations of terrified people had touched the warning and hoped it would remain just a story. Voss stood beneath it, with the black crescent already seated in half of the socket. Sable guarded the door with 6 men, while Rafe sagged between Owen and a freed prisoner. Mara stepped inside, with the silver burning hot against her chest. Voss smiled like a host, telling her she brought the road back to its hinge. Mara drew her knife. She replied she brought the knife too, so he should not feel neglected. The black half clicked. The silver chain snapped tight around Mara's neck and yanked her forward. He reached out before thinking, his gloved fingers hitting the membrane and stopping. Not blocked but warned. Every pulse from the two halves traveled up his arm as Mara braced one boot hard against the chain groove as Owen caught her belt. Sable drove his spear toward Owen's injured thigh, and the whole chapel broke into motion. Voss tore the bandage from Mara's already marked palm, and one bright drop touched the silver. Nena whispered that the clock starts when it opens. The frame filled with black light, not pure darkness, but a surface like oil pretending to be a mirror. His workbench appeared inside it from the wrong side, cleared and waiting, with him staring back like the dumbest offering ever placed on an altar. Voss shoved Mara sideways, not through. Instead, he stepped into the black mirror with 2 guards before Owen could reach him. For one breath, he was only 1 inch tall. Then he landed on the workbench, 6 feet 2, armor clanging, sword already drawn. The 2 guards emerged beside him and expanded into men with blades and famine-thin eyes. Voss looked at him without looking up. No sky, no worship, no distance, just tired repairman, a bandaged hand, Nena swearing behind him, and a tyrant smiling. Because heaven had finally become a room he could enter. Voss's first full-size sword strike carved through his workbench, exactly where his hand had looked invincible 5 minutes earlier. The blade chopped into plywood, splitting an invoice in half and sending a screwdriver skittering across the floor. The craftsman moved because Nena shoved him, not because he had some beautiful combat instinct. If the official history ever claims otherwise, burn it and insult the author. Voss stood on the bench in armor that had grown with him, 6'2" now, broad enough to block the gate's black shine behind him. The 2 guards landed beside him with blades already out and eyes wide, because even murderers need second to process fluorescent lighting. He had crossed over with everything that mattered to him: blade, armor, polished boots, and the assumption that height was morality if you owned enough. The gate behind them kept breathing. Each pulse showed the chapel below in broken slices, with Mara being dragged by the silver chain. Owen slammed his shoulder into Sable, while Rafe crawled for a fallen key. With 2 fingers that did not want to close, the 2 worlds were no longer separate scenes anymore. They were one room with a hole in the floor and knives on both sides. His plan had been simple because panic makes things simple. Keep Voss away from the table, keep Nena alive, keep the guards from figuring out stairs existed. Try to stay upright in the stupid apartment where he still had a sink full of dishes. Useful priorities, but terrible order. He got even less than that. 1 guard Lunged for Nena, she grabbed the metal tray she had cleared from the bench and whipped it into his sword arm. Steel rang. He stumbled over a coil of extension cord. Voss looked at him and smiled. At him, not upward. There you are, Voss said, the repairman above heaven. He backed into the table edge. Hard enough to bruise his ribs, the brass rim dug into his spine. Below, through the still open black mirror, he caught flashes of Mara in the chapel. Oh. Embracing the socket, Rafe doubled beside the stair, Sable driving soldiers toward them. Then Voss came at him again. 90 seconds is a comforting number until a sword starts using the first 3. Nena shouted left and he threw himself. Voss's blade carved the air where his face had been and smashed into the useless fryer compressor behind him. Sparks popped from old wiring. Just great. Of course, his appliances picked now to become dramatic. Voss stepped down from the bench like he owned his floor. You see the difference now between us. He grabbed the fire extinguisher by the handle. He pays rent. He glanced around his apartment, the cracked cabinet, the patched window, the mattress shoved behind a curtain poorly. He pulled the pin and blasted him in the face. White chemical fog swallowed his polished cruelty. Voss recoiled, coughing, sword arm lifting to shield his eyes. The nearest guard slipped in the cloud and slammed his knee into the toolbox Nena had wedged by the stairwell. Nena took the extension cord in both hands and yanked. The cord snapped tight around the guard's ankles. He went down hard and his blade carved a line through the floorboards. Nena was on him before he remembered women from his world also had knees. She drove one into his wrist. The sword clattered away. For one bright second, their desperate prep paid off. Through the gate, Mara was not watching like a saint in a mural. She was fighting the socket itself. One forearm braced across the silver, the other hand marked red. Every time Voss moved in his room, the black frame below answered him. The floor grooves in the chapel lit and died. Owen yelled numbers until his voice cracked. Sable tried to shove him off the chain line, and Owen shoved back with the entire emotional range of a man too busy to hate properly. Rafe, barely upright, dragged one prisoner away from the frame and pointed others toward the outer stairs. Not forgiven, still useful. That had become the most honest prayer in 2 worlds. He saw all of that in flashes between swords. Then the second guard reached Nena. He blocked his downward cut with a heavy tool case. The blade bit through the plastic and stopped an inch from his forearm. His right hand flared with the old feedback pain. The next swing tore his left sleeve and left a hot scrape across his forearm. He hit him with the case anyway. It was not elegant. It was barely fighting. It was 2 tired adults and 1 angry intruder using whatever was heavy enough to make the next second exist. Below, Mara's voice cracked through the silver, calling 60. He heard Owen grunt. Metal hit stone. Someone screamed in the chapel. He wanted to look but could not afford eyes anywhere except the killer aiming for Nena. Talk about intense. The guard shoved him backward into the utility sink. His ribs hit porcelain. Pain flashed white. Nena pulled the iris lever under the brass rim with her uninjured hand, trying to test the latch. Nena was still half crouched from the first guard when the second one saw her move. He slashed at her, the blade tearing Nena's sleeve and grazing her upper arm. It made her furious. Still, she didn't stop, and Nena didn't even scream. She made a tight, insulted sound as if her body inconvenienced her. Pressing a cloth to the wound, she urged Mercer to use the utility sink. Mercer grabbed the guard's belt and drove forward, crashing them both hard. They smashed into the utility sink, snapping the faucet and spraying cold water. The guard gagged and slipped, then Nena kicked his knee so hard Mercer heard it snap. Together, they shoved the guard right through the half-open doorway. He tumbled onto the landing. Nena kicked the wedge free, and Mercer slammed the door. He quickly jammed a broken mop handle through the bracket to lock it shut. The guard crashed against the door, 1 down, 1 locked out, 1 left. But the tyrant Voss was still inside, bursting through the white extinguisher cloud. With powder on his coat and a bruised nose, he looked terrifying, like a funeral statue fueled by pure hatred, just as Mi shouted 50 from below. Her voice drew Mercer's eyes to the gate. Briefly, the chapel sharpened. There Mi gripped the silver, a bright red burn mark staining her skin. Owen held the black socket with trembling arms as Sable hammered at him. Rafe desperately sawed through the prisoner chains with a tiny pocket knife. Mara saw Mercer stagger. She saw Nena hurt. She saw Voss recovering. She made a sudden choice that she later explained, despite Owen's warning screams. Rafe joked stupidity was the only thing they all actually shared. Mercer heard none of it, only watching Mara place a dagger between her teeth. She grabbed the silver with her burned hand and stepped directly into the mirror. For a single breath, she remained tiny in the dark light before suddenly landing. She landed barefoot on Mercer's workbench, and she grew to full human size. This sudden change was overwhelming, and when Mara took her first breath in his world, it felt wrong, far too loud for the woman he had known. She stared down at her hands, flexing them once before glancing at the ceiling. She seemed to check if he had a ceiling too, showing clear fear. She had just grown to the size of the giant she argued with for 9 days. But Voss moved, her terror evaporated, replaced by raw battle focus. For once, Mercer understood why his giant face in the mirror had terrified them. Mass was not comforting, it was a loaded weapon wrapped in living skin. Yet Mara had stepped into his world without losing any of her spirit. She always chose before he could calculate the heavy cost. She stumbled slightly, as crossing between realms did not come with free balance. Pulling the dagger from her teeth, she drove it deep into Voss's shoulder armor. The tyrant roared in pain as Mara locked eyes with Mercer across the room. With her hair loose and palm burned, his messy apartment was reflected behind her. Like a cruel joke, and she remarked that he was shorter than expected. Mercer, bruised and terrified, nearly laughed as he replied that she was indeed. Louder, prompting her to smirk before Voss suddenly backhanded her off the bench. She crashed onto the floor, rolled, and stood up faster than Mercer ever could, while Nena tossed Mara a fallen guard's tray, which she fumbled but quickly used to block. To deflect Voss's next strike, Mara was far from helpless at his small size. She was disoriented, absolutely furious, and learning the room faster than Voss liked. That made 2 of them. The portal pulsed behind him. 40, Owen's voice now rough and strained. Voss ripped Mara's dagger from his shoulder, tossing it away as a dark mark. Spread under his armor strap. Look at you, he said to her, breathing hard but his voice still polished, standing right where your mother never dared. Mara's expression shifted by just 1 degree, enough, and Voss saw it and pressed. The patron can make this permanent. No mud, no bowls of boiled bark, no children. Begging you to save them, a body that fits the world above, wealth, rooms. Doors that open at a mere touch. The mechanic pushed off the sink, he means a better cage. He thought he is very brand consistent. Voss did not look away from Mara. He would keep you alive. This man would keep you guilty. Mara glanced around his apartment. At the cracked window, Naz's torn sleeve, his shaking hand, and the table that had once made him a god, now reducing him to mere furniture in his own room. Then she looked at Voss. Freedom bought by making everyone else small is your religion. Not mine, she said. Voss's courtesy broke just enough to show teeth as Naz slid behind him toward the iris lever. He saw the black half at Voss's throat, its chain half torn from the socket crossing. The crescent was still burning hot, still pulsing. Toward the gate, if they got it off him, maybe the door would fail, tearing the room apart around everyone touching it. His plan, as usual, had excellent emotional confidence and terrible warranty support. He lunged anyway, as Mar lunged at the exact same time. For once, nobody had to translate. He caught Voss's sword wrist with both hands. His injured hand nearly gave out. Mara slammed the tray edge against his elbow while Na yanked at the dark chain from behind. The black half flared, punching heat into the room. The gate behind them bent inward like the air had become a mouth. Every loose tool on the bench slid directly toward it. Screws, wrench, and an unpaid bill. The mug Na had once thrown at him, the whole humiliating inventory of his life, started crawling toward another world. Voss laughed once. Ugly and relieved. There, the road knows its master, he laughed. Then why is it choking you? Mara snapped. The black crescent cracked, though not fully. A thin red line split along one edge. Voss shouted in genuine fury as the pole doubled. The gate's heavy pole tore open the stairwell door and dragged both guards forward. One vanished through the mirror, shrinking as he crossed, while the other followed into the chapel at normal size. Nas slipped in extinguisher powder and hit the cabinet, clutching her wound. 30, Owen shouted from below, except the number sounded completely wrong now, stretched and warped. The gate was no longer counting. Politely, Voss grabbed Mara by the waist and drove backward toward the mirror. He caught her wrist skin to skin. The red mark on her palm met his bare skin where the glove had torn. Pain exploded through his hand like someone poured lightning. Under the bones, the old Anwen bruise, the bridge bruise, the gallows field strain, all of it came awake at once. He held anyway. The membrane caught them. For 1 second, Mara hung between worlds, her full-size hand in his, boots dragging across his floor toward the black light. Voss had her other arm, his cracked. Black half burned red at his throat. Below him, through the mirror, he saw the chapel floor rising toward them like a tilted room. No, he groaned. Brilliant. A final nuanced argument. Mara looked at Eli's hand, then stared into his eyes. Mara understood before Eli did. The pull was taking him too, his knees sliding. The brass rims slammed into Eli's thigh. If he held on, he would cross over broken. Twisted between worlds, possibly dragging the heavy table with him, Na grabbed his shirt. But she could not stop the pull. Mara called out Eli's name. He only gripped tighter. Mara kicked him hard in the chest, knocking the wind out of him as his fingers slipped. Na yanked and yanked, desperately pulling him backward with every single bit of strength she had left in her aching body. Eli crashed onto his back as Mara and Voss disappeared into the void of the black mirror. The gate snapped shut, the dark energy folded and washed a deep red across the table. In one final blinding flash, Mara and Voss crashed into Gallows' crown, the metal crescent ripped from Voss's throat, locking into a cracked socket on the wall while the short chain stayed hooked to his chest harness. It left Voss hopelessly pinned to the stone wall. Finally, the mirror went completely dark, leaving only a pitch-black surface. This was no ordinary gray shadow. It was pitch black, though the silver still showed them images. But when Eli shoved his hand toward the glass, he only met cold, solid air. Below them, ominous red lights spread across Gallows' crown as if the sky itself bled. Mara rolled away from Voss, clearly alive but holding her shoulder. Voss staggered up near the cracked socket, his face scraped and covered in powder, all triumph drained from his expression. Sable barked out orders that Eli could not fully hear. Owen limped slowly toward Mara, on a leg that was nearly buckling beneath him. Somehow, Rafe was also still breathing. Na collapsed right beside Eli, clutching her arm while her other hand gripped his shirt. "Do not do it," she warned, as Eli realized he was already trying to force his hand through the barrier again. He stared at Mara beneath that eerie red sky. She looked up, locked eyes with Eli, and offered no apology, which was good. If she had, he might have shattered completely. A tyrant had invaded his home and bled. Mara had only stood eye to eye with him for less than a single minute. Yet she saved his life by kicking him away. Now he could see her running under that strange, blood-red sky, but when he shoved his hand down to reach her, the world struck back like a locked steel door. The resistance was not glass or air. It was a solid, freezing barrier right under his palm, yet he struck it again. The glass remained shut. Below, Mara scrambled to roll behind a ruined stone pillar as Voss's massive sword sparked off the floor. She looked so small down there. A dark stain on her sleeve, one arm dragging heavily, yet she kept moving. She was fueled by pure, unbreakable spite. Voss staggered right after her, scraped and still covered in white powder from Eli's extinguisher, the dark crescent pulsed red inside the wall, a heavy chain running straight to the harness on his chest. It was the very tether that had dragged him through the collapsing gate. Eli slammed his hand down a third time, but Na caught his wrist with her uninjured hand on the floor. Her shirt was soaked with blood at the shoulder, her jaw clenched tight in pain. The crooked stairwell door hung off its hinges where the gate's pull had ripped it open. Both massive guards had been sucked back through the collapsing portal. The apartment now reeked of chemical powder, water, and scorched electrical wiring. "Stop," Na said. She can see her, but seeing is not touching. Na called him Mercer, her sharp tone cutting through. She shoved gauze against his bleeding forearm, right next to an abandoned sword near the table. She noticed it before Eli did. Apparently, pain had not ruined her talent for being annoying. She kicked the blade right under the refrigerator cabinet, then leaned back against the table leg, teeth bared against the pain. Na pointed out that Eli's side was an absolute wreck, but her own side was even worse. She used her good hand to tie a tight bandage around Eli's forearm, then immediately wrapped her own arm with a look of pure disgust. Then she grabbed his right hand. His torn glove was soaking wet. Mara's bloody palm print had stained his skin, leaving a deep bruise. It was a sickening shade of deep purple, the kind of color that meant retirement. Below, Mara dodged a heavy black spear, caught the shaft, and drove the butt into the enemy's knee, not looking up until she could finally breathe. She called out to Eli through the silver communicator, saying she could not reach. She asked if he was hurt, but that simple question felt like a distant luxury. Voss screamed from the chapel stairs to seal off the granary yard. Any moving prisoner goes back in heavy chains while the red light grows thicker. Now wrapped Eli's arm with a strip of cloth from his own shirt. She knew what Mara needed, criticizing him for giving orders instead of trusting. Her blunt words hit him hard because they were accurate. He grimaced through the pain and finally asked Mara what she needed. For a second she looked surprised, then it vanished. People were literally trying to kill her, talk about terrible timing. She looked up at the roof, where the red glow gathered ominously. She told Eli to simply hold the hand when it came, nothing else. Owen's voice crackled from below, sounding incredibly rough as he warned them. He called it suicide, but Mara snapped right back, ordering him to stand his ground. Owen opened his mouth to argue, but stopped himself. For a guy like Owen Pike, keeping his mouth shut was almost impossible. Mara pointed her dagger, directing her allies to secure the granary stairs. Rafe slipped toward the chapel, while Celeste's runners cleared the injured people. Delau was told to give any hungry looters a sack and a job. Honestly, her rapid-fire commands are the only thing keeping everyone alive right now. Dragging the wounded away by whatever they could grab. Delau caught 2 conscripts attempting to sneak off with a stolen sack. She shoved them straight back toward the stairs before the doors opened. She yelled at them to carry food to the children. Hunger understood weight. The prisoners chained near the chapel began to stir. It did not instantly become noble. Some ran, while others fought the guards. Others stood weeping at the sight of open granary doors. To people who have starved, sudden hope looks a lot like another deadly trap. Mara did not ask for their faith, she simply gave them jobs. Slowly, order returned. Mara snatched a brass speaking horn from a fallen soldier and climbed onto a broken feed cart. Her sharp voice echoed across the yard. Demanding attention, she announced that food lay just beyond those open doors, not hidden away in Voss's greedy pockets or in his god's hand. Practicality worked better than inspiration. The hungry conscripts listened. Those who had been swinging at one another suddenly turned toward the stairs. Prisoners dragged broken carts into barricades while the Black Banner men hesitated until Sable's line pushed forward from the chapel courtyard. Owen stood firm on the bottom step with his heavy war hammer lowered. A spear pierced the crowd and slammed directly into Owen's left shoulder. The Skyman saw it. Strike home, hating that he watched. Owen grunted like a heavy door, resisting a storm, and drove his hammer sideways into the attacker's ribs. His left arm hung uselessly, but his right kept swinging as the Skyman called it. Because stating the obvious is all one can do when miracles fail. Celeste's sharp voice echoed from beneath the heavy, rising smoke, telling the Skyman to shut up. Unless he brought another arm, Na huffed, then hissed. As the movement tugged at her bandages, Wraith appeared at the chapel edge with the sliver wrapped tightly in his torn cuff, looking like a completely beaten, broken man. He crawled slowly toward the cracked frame, gasping for air. Lifting the sliver toward the table, he rasped, telling them to take it. He joked about his remains being punctual if the roof collapsed. Mara told him to save his charm for lower standards as a strange red light answered them, staining the gallows in deep crimson, before splitting open like an eyelid from the wrong side as a massive red hand pushed through the clouds, its fingers wider than massive towers. Citadel went completely dead silent, the way people freeze when their gods show their heavy knuckles. It swept toward the granary roof, ignoring Eli Mercer. Terrified care, moving like someone casually brushing crumbs off a table. 2 fingers shattered the battlements, and a tower split, sending soldiers and prisoners scrambling. Stone fell through the yard in heavy pieces capable of flattening wagons. One struck the broken cooling rack bridge, twisting steel like grass, while another smashed the counting office roof. Celeste's runners dragged both trapped boys clear in time. The Skyman watched Mara freeze as she saw it, her expression shifting for a split second before she shoved the living boy away. It was not coldness, but the brutal logic of survival. The hand swept, again tearing through a group of Black Banner men. Prisoners back into the courtyard, guards and captives fled side by side. Giant Hand made no distinction, while the Skyman was absolutely terrified of hitting allies. The hostile god was only annoyed by the resistance. Voss looked up with relief, proving to the Skyman that he had learned absolutely nothing. The Hand did not love him, it barely even noticed. The Skyman screamed Mara's name, but she was already diving to shield the children. Under a cart as massive fingers tore through the roof above them, the silver at her throat flashed white and the crescent socket flared red. The Skyman slammed the cold table in pure rage. No miracles, just his useless hand. Against a hostile god destroying everything he had sworn to protect, Voss raised his soared toward the yard and ordered Captain Sable to burn the family pens. Blame this guy. Sable froze halfway down the chapel steps. Those pens stood behind the courtyard, a row of cages. Voss had kept silent. They were hostages, women, old men, children in black banner scarves, not prisoners from Ashwick. These were the families of his own men. The girl from the family wagons pressed her hands against the iron bars. Sable saw her, his cold face barely flinched. No noble awakening occurred. There was no heroic music, just a machine realizing its own gears. We're inside the grinder. Voss turned. Captain Sable lowered his crossbow slightly. He whispered that it was his daughter. Voss spat to obey immediately. Those banner families were nothing but livestock to feed the empire. Sable raised the weapon. For one terrifying second, obedience seemed to win. Then he shot the torch from the guard's hand and aimed at Voss. The torch hit the mud. Instantly, the courtyard erupted in pure chaos. Some soldiers turned with Sable, hacking locks and dragging the cages open. The rest stayed with Voss, only to be crushed by the mutiny. Mara did not absolve Sable. She did not even thank him. Instead, she pointed to the side gate. Move them, she ordered. Sable obeyed. That action mattered far more than any hollow apology. Voss watched his lines fracture and his own granary overrun with desperate people who were no longer waiting for permission to eat. For the first time, he looked less like a ruler and more like a trapped prisoner. He was locked on the wrong side. Terrified, he fled upstairs. He was not escaping the fight, but scaling the chain roof toward Mara. The threat was clear, but she was busy rescuing a trapped child. Voss crossed the platform in 3 giant strides and caught her from behind. He pinned her arm as a sharp blade hovered below her throat. Beside them, the execution winch had 2 separate release systems. Voss's safety tether ran through a heavy pulley on the ceiling. The giant mechanical hand descended once more, moving slower this time. The giant warrior lunged forward, but Nina quickly blocked him with her good shoulder. She warned him that rushing in now with a blade at her neck would get Mara killed. He hated her logic. It was efficient. He looked back down. Mara had gone perfectly still. She was not frozen, but ready. Voss pressed the blade tighter, forcing her to stay absolutely motionless. He dragged her toward the execution chain and demanded total compliance. Voss ordered her giant ally to kneel. Mara simply said no. That single word steadied everyone's hands. Voss smiled through bleeding lips. He whispered that her mother had said the exact same thing. Mara's face remained stone cold as Voss leaned close to her ear. Yet his words echoed clearly to everyone nearby and to those watching from high above. Anwen did not die because she was brave. She died because she took the key. Voss boasted that he ordered the bolt, the fire, and her death. Below, Owen tried to climb the stairs, but collapsed as his body failed. Voss took pleasure in this. Starvation made their obedience so cheap. Mara's mother wanted hunger to remain expensive. Mara's boot shifted. It was a tiny scrape under the platform. She was not breaking. She was placing herself. Voss mocked her, claiming her mother begged. Mara spoke, keeping him distracted. He spotted her heel hook beneath the thin platform rope. Voss did not notice. Rafe lifted the sliver at the chapel edge, arms shaking. The tiny silver chip caught the red light, throwing it upward through the table like a needle. Now looked from the sliver to Mercer's hand. A keeper's living mark opened both halves. She warned him there was only one chance, not a crossing, a reach. He had already paid half the admission with that hand. That is not medicine, he said. Now agreed, it was just a terrible idea with evidence. The red hand spread over the granary roof. Mara looked at Mercer with Voss's knife held under her chin. And she did not ask him to save her. She only wanted the task she had already given. Hold the other hand, nothing else. Mercer tore the fresh wrap off his right palm. Nat cursed at him with real feeling this time, then grabbed his wrist and aimed the single bright drop, instead of letting him fumble it everywhere like an idiot. He pressed his reopened palm to the thin silver trace in the brass rim where the table's old pattern curled under the glass. Below, Rafe pressed the sliver against the chapel stone with both hands. Pain tore through Mercer clean enough to erase the room. The membrane gave. The opening was narrow and unstable. Narrow seam in the sky, barely 60 seconds deep if they got lucky, and much less if the universe developed a sense of humor. His hand passed through, the people below screamed. Voss jerked Mara backward, thinking Mercer was coming for him, but he was not. That was the hardest movement of his life, harder than pulling away from fire, harder than letting go when Mara kicked him. He reached past her, past Voss passed the knife he wanted to flick into a mountain and drove his injured hand upward into the descending red glove. Skin met leather over the gallows. Crown, the impact cracked the roof tiles beneath them. The red hand stopped one tower length above Mara's head. For the first time, the calm voice lost a fraction of its polish. Unauthorized observer has physical contest. Yeah. He muttered through his teeth, doubting if anyone heard. Put it on his invoice. Nab braced both arms against his shoulder and the table, her bandage darkened below. Mara's eyes stayed on Voss, not him. Good. Voss's knife stayed close under her jaw. His other hand tightened on the black socket tether, crossing his harness while hundreds waited below the granary doors. Starving and staring upward, his hand and the red glove strained over them from opposite sides of the red-lit sky. 60 seconds left, maybe less, above his wrist. The red glove tightened, trying to bend his fingers backward while the table groaned under Naz's bandaged shoulder. The final thing he saw before the world became pure pressure was Mara lowering her heel onto the thin platform. Rope, the first collision of their hands hit gallows crown like thunder from below. From his side it was much, much worse. His hand was buried through the table up to the wrist, locked around a red leather glove. Every joint protested, feeling too warm to be cloth and too strong to be human in any comforting sense. The red hand pushed down, he pushed back. Roof tiles exploded under the pressure. The broken granary tower lined, stones grinding loose, but his fingers held his wrist one tower length above Mara's head. Not steady, not noble, just held, which was suddenly the whole job. Nab braced her shoulder against his side and both hands against the brass rim. Her bandage had darkened. Against his side, both hands gripping the brass rim, her bandage had darkened. The metal scraped her forearm, but she kept both hands on the rim. 48, she said. Seconds probably, she added, telling him not to debate. The red hand's voice came through the red sky, so calm his teeth ached. You do not know what you are protecting, it warned. Below, people screamed as gods fought above. They fought right over their roofs. He wanted to scream back something heroic. Instead, he just tightened his grip, yelling that he knew his purpose. Panic masked under it, his fingers were already slipping. His leather glove dragged against his palm, and every time the red hand twisted, agony shot through his old bruise, turning the whole world white at the edges. Nearby, the table legs scraped loudly across the floor. Na hooked her boot around a leg and leaned her entire weight into his hip. The broken stairwell door rattled. The guards were gone, fleeing through the collapsed gate and leaving their swords behind. No one could focus on the wreckage. Me heard the noise, but she did not look up. Voss's knife still hovered near her collar on the platform. His other hand gripped the black socket tether across his harness. The thin platform rope lay helpless under Mara's heel. Above them, a massive rope held the heavy execution counterweight. She had given him one single job: hold the other hand, nothing else. So he watched her stand right in Voss's reach and held back. It became the hardest rescue he would ever perform. Down below, Owen slammed his weight into the granary lever with his one good shoulder. That brutal injury had left Owen Pike's left arm hanging completely useless, but Owen never needed elegance to be lethal. Across from him, Sable's defectors hammered the heavy crossbar. None of them moved like redeemed men. They fought like desperate fathers and brothers who discovered too late that blind obedience has teeth. Meanwhile, Rafe crawled along the side chute, pressing a sharp sliver into his palm. Every breath folded him in agony, but he kept pointing prisoners to the inner latch. Left peg, he wheezed. Lift, don't pull. Pulling is for honest people and doors built by fools. A captive woman lifted it. The old bar jumped. The doors finally creaked open, but slowly. One heavy door sagged inward, caught on stone. For one agonizing breath, the crowd stared at the crack like it was another trap. Voss had conditioned them to fear even food. Suspicious, but watch closely. Owen throws his body against the lever. Sable's men tore the crossbar free. The second door swung open, slamming into two loyalists, knocking them into the mud. Grain poured out, real local grain. Voss's hoarded stash, stolen so long ago, he forgot hungry hands always take back what hunger remembers. The crowd surged as Celeste sliced through them like a knife. She ripped open the nearest sack, shoving a handful straight into the mouth of a little boy crawling under their boots. Eat first, she commanded him. Then carry. Delas slapped a greedy man trying to drag a whole sack away. If you steal, steal for the kids, she barked. A former banner guard tried to close the door, maybe out of habit or sheer panic, as order collapsed around him. Sable slammed the butt of his crossbow into him and pointed him toward the loading chute. No locks, Sable growled. No one. Thanked him, which was exactly how it should be. The initial panic settled. Because they saw food in mouths, not a promise but real sustenance. That. The sound reached the granary roof. Voss heard it, his face instantly twisting. He had lost armies, lost children, lost the lie that the Red Hand spared his own people. But the roar of starving people seeing the granary doors swing open took something much deeper. It shattered the quiet inner room where control had always waited with clean gloves. Everything is quietly falling apart now, and he drags Mara backward. Voss orders her to claim the grain is contaminated. Mara whispers, "You already used that." "I kept them alive while you kept them weak," she adds, "easier to stack." Voss holds the blade steady, whispering that her mother begged. Mara stomps down on his foot. It is a sharp, ugly blow. Simultaneously, she slams a broken cage pin into his knife wrist. Voss manages to cut her, but not deep enough. A thin red line opens beneath her jaw. Instead of pausing, she uses the pain to fuel her move, classic Mara, but terrifying to watch. Watching from 4 feet above, she twists violently under his arm to break free. Her shoulder fails halfway, teeth bared in pain. Suddenly, he feels his hand jerked. The red hand nearly drives right through him. Nena rams her hip into his ribs. "No, I know," he mutters, "then do it harder." Meanwhile, Mara slips right behind Voss. She grabs the black socket tether on his harness. He spins, keeping his knife ready. But she is too fast, already looping the tether around the old counterweight winch. "You really think she begged?" Mara asks. Voss is breathing heavily now. "My mother taught me how to make men listen to the wrong hand," she growls. She yanks hard, the winch teeth catch the tether, and the black half flares red. It is fused to the socket by heat, exposing the keeper Mark's ugly road. Suddenly, the red hand's heavy leather glove convulses violently right in his desperate grip. 2 fingers claw toward the roof as a voice echoes, "You are damaging my asset." The invoice just got longer. He fires back. Nena's hand shoots toward the lever. "Mara, on my count," Nena calls out. She doesn't sound dramatic at all. Instead, she sounds like she is back in an ambulance with terrible lighting and alarms. Her injured arm trembles violently as she reaches for the heavy, rusted lever. But her eyes remain locked on his wrist. If the iris closes too early, they are dead. It would slice Klain through the only hand holding the sky above them. Below, the crowd hears thunder, but Mara hears enough, and Voss does too. Voss wraps both hands around the tether and throws his entire weight backward. He desperately tries to yank the black half free before Mara can engage the winch. Suddenly, the chain platform cracks beneath them. Down below, young Finn appears. He emerges from Celeste's support line, carrying a blanket and a massive sack. "Of course the boy is here. You just knew he wouldn't stay away." Voss spots him, and then his gaze snaps back to Mara. He lunges toward the stairs, but not to escape. Quickly, Mara cuts the rope. The platform drops 6 inches. The winch screams as the metal groans. The tether snaps violently around Voss's harness and the mounting loop. His grand lunge turns into an ugly, pride-shattering fall. Mara lands hard on the roof. She rolls across the surface as the knife spins away and the black half tears free. At that exact second, Nena slams the lever down. He releases his grip. He rips his arm upward as the brass aperture clamps shut like a heavy machine. It bites through thunder, catching the red hand's glove across 2 fingers. Before the entity can tear back, it lets out a sound far worse than any scream. It was more than that, a perfectly controlled breath that finally broke right in the middle. The red sky snapped shut. His hand hit the table and pain shot up his shoulder. Nena grabbed him just before he could collapse face first right into the glass. That broken stairwell door settled against the wall with one last knock. For once, even his apartment knew to stay quiet as the black half landed beside Mara. Splintered and smoking, Voss still did not fall to the courtyard. Instead, the counterweight chain used to punish grain thieves whipped violently through the roof. The chain caught his harness, yanking him outward over the doors. Voss slammed into the black banner, standard hanging above the open courtyard. There he hung suspended, where every soldier and child could see him. Still conscious, and trust me, the universe loves being thorough, Voss tried to speak. And his polished voice was gone. Me staggered to the roof edge. With one shoulder hanging low, she weakly told him that he only kept order. Then she accused him of only keeping keys as Voss reached skyward. Nothing answered him. He tried again, louder, not a command now, but a desperate plea. Calling out for window 3 again, only silence answered him this time. It was the only honest thing he ever received. Corin Voss finally looked truly small. Twisting against the chain, his eyes locked onto Finn standing below. Even abandoned, Voss chose one last piece of leverage and kicked off the standard. Voss swung directly toward the grain line, where Finn stood frozen. Mara did not ask him for permission. Without even looking up, she cut the heavyweight rope. The counterweight dropped instantly. The chain snapped Voss upward, tearing him sideways. Wood split and iron rang as the black standard ripped away. Voss struck the beam above his own granary and went completely limp. Starvation was the fear he taught them, yet here he hung. Black cloth landed, spilling grain everywhere. No one dared to cheer at first. A fallen tyrant leaves a heavy silence while people wait to see what happens. Slowly Finn set his sack down and walked toward the spill. He picked up a single kernel, looked at Mara, then ate it. That broke the spell. Children moved first. Adults make fear complicated, but children just understand hunger. Celeste tried to form an orderly line, but quickly lost control of the crowd. She grabbed the nearest sack, throwing herself right into the center of the chaos. Shoveling grain into small hands, she pointed them toward other survivors. Soon, intense relief spread through the crowd the same way panic once did. Delay immediately put the defectors to work. Zabel slowly lowered his heavy crossbow. Staring at the dead body, Zabel questioned every order he obeyed. Up on the roof, Mara sat down as her legs finally gave out from exhaustion. The young man wanted to reach out for her, but he held back. He kept his injured hand on his side of the table and softly called her name. Mara touched the silver, breathing hard, telling him she was still there. He admitted he was worried, but she teased that his worry looked unattractive. The young man laughed, but the sharp pain made Nena warn him to stop. Back in the apartment, Nena made him sit down while she cleaned up. She locked the abandoned swords away, calling the broken stairwell a future problem. Their future selves would hate her for it, but at least they were still alive. Wrapped in slightly fewer bandages, the rest took days, then weeks, and none of. It was clean, grain left gallows crown in carts, some black banner families. Walked beside prisoners they had helped cage. Some were cursed at, some deserved. Worse, Sable kept working with his eyes forward and his daughter's hand locked. In his, nobody forgave him, no need. That week he opened roads. And took orders from Mara without pretending obedience had become virtue. Owen survived, mostly because Celeste bullied him too hard for rest to get a turn. His left shoulder never lifted right again. He complained about it with enough volume that everyone knew he was recovering. Rafe held the sliver until the last card of injured people crossed out of Gallows' crown, then he gave it back to Mara with both hands. When normal reach returned, Mara set the inert shard on stone and he lifted it through with debt paid. He asked. Mara looked at him for a long time. Debt named, he nodded. That answer seemed to hurt him and hold him up at the same time. On the 12th day, they buried Anwen. Properly, they buried her near the new field below Iron Nest, where the quarry road opened toward water, not an Ashwick's burn square, and people had enough food in them to stand without swaying. He lowered one fresh chicken nugget beside the grave. They did not need it to survive that morning. The granary had done that, their hands had done that. Mara's nerve, Naz lever. Owen's stubborn shoulder, Celeste's line, Rafe's sliver, even Sable's ugly refusal had done that. No salvation now, it was just a meal. Mara made him cut it smaller, still too large, she muttered. He learned nothing. He knew. He remained busy. People laughed softly, then a few began to kneel. Mara turned so fast half the children flinched. Up, the word cracked across the field. One old man stayed on his knees, crying too hard to hear. Mara knelt in front of him, took his hands and pulled him up with her. Stand, she said. Quieter, eat standing. So they did. That became the first rule. Before anyone tried to carve rules into stone and make them boring, requests came through the silver. No worship as payment. No food without Celeste testing. No looking into private rooms unless invited. Local choices stayed below. Woman asked what happened if he disagreed. Mara looked up at him. He said, then he would argue badly and lose. That answer traveled better than any noble speech he had ever avoided. If Mara covered the silver, his sky closed. If Nas said his hand was done, his hand was done. If Finn touched the pendant only to tell him a pulley was ugly, apparently that counted as diplomacy. Mara kept the silver half. He kept the broken black half and a coffee tin inside his desk, wrapped in 3 layers of shopcloth and 1 layer of Nena, threatening to hit him with a wrench if he touched it bare. 2 weeks after Voss fell, the tin Got warm, Nena was in his apartment, changing the bandage on his palm. Mara stood under the glass at Iron Nest, arguing with Owen about weather. Temporary roof repairs could remain temporary after they had survived one. Storm, the answer was no. Owen lost loudly. The black shard clicked. Inside the tin, every light in his apartment dimmed, his powered-off phone. Lit on the table, it was neither a call nor a message, a live image of his own. Apartment from above, stillness. Nas stopped breathing through her nose, which meant she was either terrified or preparing to assign tasks, usually both. The black half projected 6 red points across its cracked surface, not symbols. Eli understood, not a map he could use, 6 small points of red light arranged. Round the broken place that had once been theirs, then a calm voice returned. The voice did not come from Gallows Crown, it came from Eli's phone, calling him Eli Mercer. The red hand said, "You saved 1 valley, but I own the other 6, the image on his phone. Tilted as if someone somewhere had leaned closer over another piece of glass. Na reached for the iron lever under the table, while Mara touched the silver. Half below she had heard enough, of course she had, her voice coming through. Clear, tired, and already sharpening. Which one do we hit?